Hello, this is Austin Wintory. It's 2020, my first Game Maker's Notebook of the year, and today I had an incredible honor to speak with one of the true living legends of game audio, Marty O'Donnell. He, of course, is best known for the endless legacy of music for Halo and Destiny, and we go into extreme detail on all of that. His work in the 80s as the composer of the Flintstone Vitamin jingle. We gave you 10 times more on that than you could ever imagine. And of course, achieving the highest honor, I think, of any game composer, an elaborate, detailed collaboration with Sir Paul McCartney. So enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Marty O'Donnell.
Austin Wintory.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm excellent. How are you?
I am thrilled that we are talking on the correct day and not...
I was ready to talk yesterday, but now I'm spent.
Okay. I was just going to say, hopefully you reserved some energy and good stories.
I played with my grandsons last night, so... But,
Can we just only talk about that?
We could, sure.
Okay, good.
How far away from grandsons you are? I'm thinking...
Oh, man. I mean,
yeah. All right, that's enough.
A long way. Yes, that is not on the horizon.
Okay.
But I can vicariously,
sure,
and by proxy,
absolutely derive
derive all the joy and none of the responsibility, which is kind of my MO on that. So,
okay.
There's all kinds of territory that I would love to explore and go into, but it feels, especially because a lot of the wonderful Marty trivia is, I think, relatively well known in the game music community, but maybe less in the broader community that hopefully is listening to this.
Hopefully, that'd be great.
Yeah,
broader community.
Let's crack open some deep cuts, and I have to start. It's obligatory to start with Flintstone Vitamins.
I saw that was going to happen.
I knew. Well, sometimes when one has this sort of banquet of cultural lexicon to choose from, but I can frame it in a way that's hopefully interesting, because I know you've probably been asked a million times, but it's just so wonderful and novel because there's so many folks. Composers tend to come from one of a few general camps, and obviously anybody who's been in the industry for sort of maybe we'll say 10 years or less, almost all of them went to school to become game composers and then fed straight in, but then there's a whole other group of folks that were doing something different with their life and kind of found their way in through various means. And you have one of the more novel examples of that, of all of this community. So why don't you just kind of...
Well, first
like a background question.
Yeah, basically. First of all, to give some of my credence to the things I'm saying here, I believe I'm the oldest composer in the game business.
The Gandalf of
I am sort
game
of the Gandalf.
composers.
I'm starting to look more and more like Gandalf.
It's working for you.
Yeah, good. So there was no way I could go to school and say I want to be a game composer, because that just wasn't an option. Nobody was a game composer.
Right.
So I went to school.
Even freelance game music, even if you were super proactively obsessed with games.
No, I mean, when I got my master's from USC, there were no games that had music. I mean, we're talking about like 1981.
Right.
So what are we, Ms. Pac-Man or something?
Yeah,
I mean, so, and not that there's anything wrong with those early games, music-wise. It's just that it wasn't something that would be attractive to someone like me, who was a classically trained piano major and also like prog rock and jazz. And, it's just like, I didn't ever think about it. So
were games on your radar in general in any sense?
No. I mean, sure. Actually, that's
like, were you a gamer?
I was a gamer as much as you could be. So I was playing, a game called Dungeon that was actually a friend of mine had on he managed some sort of mainframe at a pharmaceutical company, and they had this little text adventure thing that no one had heard of. It was a shareware thing called Dungeon, which turns into Zork.
Wow.
That becomes Zork. So it started, this is 1977 maybe? Yeah, I think it was like 77, 78. And he brought a phone cradle modem, if you can even picture that, and a heat sensitive printer.
Wow.
So the paper was heat sensitive. And then like he logged in, he had to do all this magic stuff. I was just watching him, and it spit out, and he goes, yeah, here it goes. And it goes, zzz, 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 zzz. You're standing in front of a White House. There's a mailbox there. And then the little caret, the cursor.
Yeah.
Whatever. You can't even call it a cursor because it was a heat sensitive printer.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, well, what is this? He goes, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I want to open the mailbox. And he goes, well, type that in. Okay, open mailbox. Zzz, zzz. You open the mailbox and there's a letter there. I'm like, what? This is so cool. And up until that point, I had played, Pong and things like that.
Right.
Obsessively. So to have something that was actually talking to me
Right.
and describing a scene and describing this forest to the south and this White House to the north and a secret entrance and grooves and lanterns, I was completely hooked. So I from that point on, I just followed what was happening with the games that were available.
But as you said,
But there was no graphics, and there was no music, and there was no
Exactly,
actors
yeah.
or sound or any of that. That all started coming later. And I think by the time the Nintendo systems came out, that's when I actually started to go, all right, this is more interesting.
right.
So Zelda was I loved that game, the first Zelda. I just
Oh.
was nuts about it. I bought it for my kids, and then I wouldn't let them play.
Cool.
You're going to wreck my save.
More. I'm getting more vicarious fatherhood and grandfatherhood.
There you go.
Wonder.
Yes.
I love it.
So what ends up happening there is
Well, so you're basically on the path of a musician, and games
Yes.
are just sort of not ready for you yet.
games are a hobby.
And where
a fun
is
hobby.
this? Where are we?
Well,
in the world in this part of our
At
story?
first, I was in Los Angeles going to USC. I got my graduate degree in composition at USC.
Mhm.
And then I moved back to Chicago and opened, out of desperation, a music company that made music for TV and commercials and whatever. Anything that anybody would hire us to do music for.
What was
we
your
did.
going into the graduate degree? And if someone had said, in 10 years, total wish fulfillment, what would you have been doing? Was it sort of contemporary concert music, or was it film scores, or was it what kind of?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because a master's degree is obviously that much more committed than if you had just stopped
Yes.
at a bachelor's, for example.
Yeah.
So it's like you were aimed at something. I assume.
No, I had no direction.
Utterly aimless.
I'm an aimless
Well,
person.
may I say, job well done for someone utterly lost in just wandering.
While I was in college, undergraduate at a conservatory, I switched from a piano major to composition because I had I had started a rock band that was covering prog rock and
Oh, nice.
fusion. And the drummer one day said to me, why do you work so hard on figuring out all the parts to these complicated songs? Why don't you write something? And I'm like, can I write? Is that permitted? I mean, it actually seemed novel.
Yeah,
I
right.
was probably 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my sophomore year as a piano major, thinking that's what you do. You just learn more and more about piano.
Almost so.
But I was going to be a rock
autopiloting in
star.
way.
So
Ah.
that was my real goal, was to be a rock star.
Well,
as
I
popular,
might say, job well done.
yeah.
I think
No,
you
it took a
managed to
while.
hit the game industry version of that.
Well, that's an interesting thought. But I was going to be like the next. I wanted to have a band that was the next Gentle Giant.
Interesting.
Anybody here know who Gentle Giant is? Okay, fine.
I know the name, but what
All
happens
right.
is
Everybody needs to go look up Gentle Giant and listen to their stuff. They're amazing. Anyway, it was King Crimson and Yes and Genesis and Jethro Tull.
All right,
and
now
blah,
we're
blah,
now
blah.
we're in,
Yeah.
now we're in more familiar territory.
But Gentle Giant was the best of all of them.
Shots
Okay.
fired.
Yes. Anyway,
It's going to be 6
where
Gentle
did this
Giant fans
question-
listening to this who are like, hell yeah, Marty O'Donnell.
that's true.
Well, so
Yeah,
you say
so-
in desperation, then the relocation to Chicago.
Yeah,
Uh,
I actually the desperation sort of happened first. I got married after I got my bachelor's degree,
Mhm.
and then I painted houses for a year, and I was completely aimless at that point. I had a little band that didn't go anyplace, and I'm have no idea what I'm going to do with this weird music degree that had turned into a composition degree. I mean, the dean at the conservatory said, Marty, you've already into the first part of your junior year as a piano major. You don't have enough time to switch to composition and graduate. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I don't need to graduate. I'm going to be a rock star, so why? I'm only here to figure some stuff out. But I did get I somehow figured out how to get a bachelor's in composition. And then a year of painting houses, and I thought, well, maybe I should just go get a master's. So I applied and I got to USC.
Then I'll be really good at painting these houses.
Well, I never stopped painting houses, by the way.
Yeah?
I was also a TA at USC because I had no money. But I didn't really have a thought. I thought, well, maybe because my father was a film director, I thought maybe I could be a film composer. And so I even took a course with
In L.A.
I wasn't necessarily thinking it would be. I thought I would maybe move back to Chicago.
Well,
and do
what
it
I'm
there.
saying was he working in L.A.? And
No,
part of
he
that
was
world?
he was in the Midwest. He was in
Okay, got
Chicago. But I took a class with David Raxon, who's
legend.
Yes, and that was amazing. I still love the fact that his first film gig was with Charlie Chaplin, and then I learned a bunch of stuff from David Raxon. So
It's literally like the source. It's the first pass at film music that has existed.
exactly.
Yeah,
And he knew
Raxon was-
everybody. I mean, Raxon knew everybody. It's just amazing to know that that's part of my
Oh yeah.
education. So those years at USC were really important. But then it was like I also got a little bit twisted. I don't know about you. I would love to know more about your education, but I was
also a
twisted.
USC guy. So
Oh, are you really?
yeah. Raxon was sadly gone by the time I showed up, but yeah,
'Cause you're that much younger.
I was
so
I
much
was on
younger.
the heels.
But what USC taught me primarily as getting my master's in music. And by the way, the professors there did not encourage me. They were like, "Are you going to, this music course in composing for film will not apply to your degree."
Yeah, of course.
And I'm
It's
like,
worth.
what?
I feel like it might be worth contextualizing for those unaware
Yes,
of our
yes.
world. The long-running bias against anyone who actually wants to earn a living with writing music.
You mean
to put it slightly callously.
commercial music?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Commercial. Now we call it media music.
Oh, media
But
music,
commercial
okay.
music,
Yeah.
yes, was always this kind of bastard child by comparison to the world of art music, where it's like, yes, I could write a Flintstones vitamin or a jingle or title after title of video game music that's heard by countless millions, or I can write a symphony that all of 50 people will hear at
If
a
you're
premiere, if you're lucky, and which will not really be performed to your satisfaction.
No.
You won't have enough rehearsal time. All that somehow. The academic world, it's still to this day, although it's better than it was, but
getting better. It is
but
getting
yeah,
better.
that kind of the ivory tower idea was very, very
As an
alive
aside,
and strong.
that's why my studio had a sign over the top called the Ivory Tower. So, and in Halo 2, there's a multiplayer map called Ivory Tower that was named after.
Really.
Yeah, because I still sort of carried that attitude
I was
into
going to say
Bungie.
you're still like emailing, USC asking for their feedback
Yes.
on your compositions and
What happened was I got my master's, went back to Chicago, started working as a grip because I thought I was going to be a professor at the American Conservatory of Music in Chicago.
but working as a grip like on a film site.
Yeah,
a film
because
that
I had
shoots
that as I'd grown up, like I said, my dad was a director, so I grew up on sets. So
right.
that was like a side skill that I had in my back pocket. So I had a young baby, Flintstones kids, singer now. This is all the way back.
I never knew that.
Yes. Oh, I'm just leading up to the whole.
This
is such a long story.
I love
it.
And by the time we get to the end, it's like, and
That's
well,
the
here
end.
we go. This has
That's
been
it.
the Game Maker's Notebook.
So I got to Chicago, and a producer came up to me and said, "Marty, you've got a master's in music. Why don't you write music for commercials and film here in Chicago?" And I said, "This is absolutely what I said. I'm not making this up. I don't want to prostitute my art." So that's what I had learned from USC.
And what's the time difference between that and you saying, you know what?
Less than 24 hours.
Wow.
Because the director of that very same shoot I was on came to me and said, "Hey, Marty, I'll give you $500 to score this film we're doing." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it." I'm not kidding.
Prostitution cuts off at $400.
Yeah.
And from there on, it's just earning a living.
So exactly the reason I didn't want to prostitute my art is because no one had actually offered me money before.
Right. I mean, isn't that just the quintessential sort of academic composer headspace,
Yes,
though?
yes.
When you're kind of insulated, everything feels very pure and feels very sacrosanct. And then as soon as there's a chance to earn a living, it's like, okay, hell with that. And especially because, as we'll get to, there is actually no sacrifice of the art necessarily implicit in any of this.
No, as a matter of fact, I think that's the key to my aesthetic, is that no matter what I'm writing for, I never want to violate just my own integrity in terms of like, oh, I need to copy this thing. Like even when I was doing commercials, I was like, well, okay, I got to score this Tidy Cat commercial, so I'm still going to take it seriously. And I did.
Lush Gregorian chant choir.
No, it was a pretty goofy commercial, but I still wanted to do a good job on it, and I still argued about whether the oboe goes up or it goes down on whatever the claymation cat was doing. I mean, it's hilarious. But so fast forward a few years, and we're doing commercials. My friend Mike Salvatore had a studio in his basement. And that's, when I got the $500 offer, I went right to Mike. I said, "Hey, you want to split this? I need a studio to record. I don't even know what the guy wants, but I need a studio." Wow. He goes, "Sure, come on in." So immediately my price was cut in half to $250. And then we learned a few months later that we owed the government something. So I think my price was actually $133.33. Something
not
like
bad.
That. Yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, so fast forward to 1985. And now we have some clients, and we've established ourselves as commercial guys in Chicago.
How quickly, just as a quick side note, then how quickly were you able to make this what you do?
See, I'm trying to move forward. I'm only to 85, and you're pushing me back again.
I know, exactly. I'm going all the way back to inception here.
Okay, so that night,
while in the amniotic fluid, what was in your mind?
Okay, so the director says, "I'll give you $500." Mm-hmm. That night, I went to Mike's house and said, "Let's split it." That night, we had a Casio keyboard that somebody had left. He was producing some little band in his studio, a small 8-track studio. And they had left the Prophet Pro 1, a Casio.
You had some toys.
And a TR-808.
I don't know that one.
Okay, it's the Roland TR-808. Ooh. Okay, all those people in the audience that know what a TR-808 is,
I wonder if there's any overlap
to tweet horrible thing. No. This is hip hop. This is the drum machine for hip hop.
The 808. It's funny how framing it as TR-808.
Okay, yeah.
Completely scrambled my brain.
Sorry.
Duh, yeah, that is the drum machine,
all right,
of course.
So you've redeemed yourself. Yes.
I
still have it.
No
we bought one right away after
Mike's,
that.
Mike's wondering what the hell happened to this thing from 30 years ago.
That's true. But what happened was I'm like, how do these things work? How do we lay tracks? And we did what we fondly remember as our 5-song demo that night. And there were 5 tunes that we did on that. And I took this cassette player to the director the next day, the cassette tape of our songs to the director the next day. He goes, "Oh yeah, this will be great. You're hired. We'll let you do the score when
So this was an invitation to demo, essentially.
Yeah, he's sort of like, "Well, what can you show me?" Meanwhile, there was this person who was a client for another project at the film studio that was for a Marshall Fields commercial. Marshall Fields is gone now, but it was a famous big store in Chicago. And the guy heard it. He goes, "That's one of the songs." Was something else. "We've been looking for something like this. This is unique. I'm not making this up." He says, "Can we buy this from you? Can we use this?" And that very next Sunday, like we're only talking a couple days later, on the Chicago Bears TV game, I'm watching TV at home. Up comes the Marshall Fields commercial. Up comes the music we did. Okay. No voiceover, no sound effects, just music and visuals on TV. And I'm like, "Well, this is easy." So
Yeah,
from the point I said yes to the point I'm watching my music on TV is maybe 4 days.
Yeah.
And then I said to Mike, "Quit your job. Normal. Let's go into business together." And eventually, it took a few months for him to quit and decide he was going to do this. And then, of course, immediately we had no work at all.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, because there are a lot of composers that, they may get lucky kind of out of the gate, and then it creates this sense of, oh, I guess this is life now.
Journey.
And it's a very well, no, but that's the funny thing. Journey was on the back of Flow, which
that's
fraction of the people, but Flow was kind of like your story, where we met as students. I did Flow. It came out. It made the rounds. It
you
got
really
a lot
are
of attention.
young, aren't you? Holy mackerel! Okay, never mind.
One foot in the womb here. When we did that one, it came out, and I distinctly remember someone saying that I was the Brian Eno of games, which was hilarious because I came from a similar background as you. It couldn't be more of a bizarre thing.
So you should know, I played Flow, and I forgot that was your music. That was a beautiful game.
Oh, well, that's very kind. It was born of total ignorance because I had no idea what I was doing, and it was just
And of course, all the purists who were around me, I'm like, "You guys got to see this game. It's so cool." I'm like, "Oh, that's not a game."
Yeah, well,
I'm like, "What?"
I don't think that discussion's calmed down that much since then. But yes, it was our kind of our initial origins, but similarly, that was this amazing experience out of the gate, where we connected as students, and then just this kind of amazing turn of events happened with Sony, and it was suddenly on on PlayStation before I'd even walked out the doors at USC. But then the problem was that
that's so cool.
It was so kind of esoteric that it's not like the offers came flooding in the wake of that. So I had a similar kind of experience where I was really grindstone in all directions as much as I could. And Journey was years later, same developer, but years later, and then that did change things. But it was, there was this intermediary period of like,
interesting.
I'm kind of in this space of I've done stuff, but times are a little lean.
Yes.
So I relate.
Yes.
4 days is a hell of a record to beat.
Well, the 4 days to the first thing that made me feel like this is easy, and then months of like, oh my gosh, this is not easy. You got to really work your tail off and beat the pavement.
They don't always just walk in the door and say, "That's what I'm after."
Yeah, the one thing we hit the industry, the commercial music industry, just at the right time, where this is like 1982, 83, where the traditions of jingle composers, believe it or not, that's what they're called in Chicago, and New York and LA, but whatever.
That term has definitely faded, but I always knew it as that.
Yes, we were called jingle composers, and we learned this as we went because I didn't know the industry, neither did Mike, so we just got into it. But all the other jingle composers did the traditional, like, clients come into their little studio, they have a piano, and they go, dun, 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 this is going to be the French horns, boom, 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 put on the piano, and now the singers come in, and then it's all song and dance, old-timey style, right?
Right.
And we were like, oh, let's see, we're going to rent. No, we took a loan out to buy a Prophet 5 so that we could do, string sounds and synth bass. And we hooked the TR-8 up to this poly sequencer so everything was like in sync. And we started producing really cool sounding, what people would think of as electronic music now. But at the time, so like if we had a demo to do, our demos sounded better than everybody else's demos because everybody was still doing piano demos.
I was going to say the demo basically was essentially the finished product.
And I'm trying to sound like Vangelis every time.
Yeah.
So, or Vangelis, I forget what's the right way to say it. But anyway, that
I've never gotten a consensus on that.
Okay, so that was fun to do. And Mike's wife at the time played violin, so we would have Gail come down and I would play string parts and then we would overdub her as one violin, and we would overdub her like 20 times and submix and do all this stuff. So our stuff sounded great. And to the point where one of our clients early on, they were like, wow, I love your idea. This is going to be wonderful. Now, what are you going to do for the final? And I was like, okay, this is a word I hadn't heard before. My ears sort of pricked up. I'm like, oh, well, we're going to do a whole bunch of other cool stuff.
Yeah.
But I realized that, like, because of course I was thinking this is the final.
Right, exactly.
I got nothing. So we learned quickly that there's still in the commercial business, there's still this sort of demo stage, and then, you go to the next level.
Right.
So we started working with live musicians and other people other than just me singing.
Yeah. And so when did this become a sustainable life for you, where it really, that you had that initial window? And by the time we get to 1985, I think you're okay.
Sustained,
so then
yeah. We had moved from the suburbs of Chicago. We had opened up a little office in Chicago and brought our equipment with us. So we had this little studio downtown. We were in the Streeterville recording studio building. They were on the 3rd and 4th floors, and we snuck into a small open office. Not we paid rent, but I mean,
I was going to say,
it was so fun because we could just like do demos with our clients and stuff, and then run upstairs and use the big studio. And they had, it was a really nice studio, but our studio was still the Tascam 8-track.
But is
reel-to-reel.
Is this months later?
No, this is now.
Later,
it was
years?
like 85. So like 3 years later,
Okay,
we were
got it.
downtown and trying to be official.
Got it.
We had done some national spots and some other things. We sort of lucked into some things. So at that point, like, we had clients, and the client came to us. His name is Jim Morris. He's a writer. So in the commercial business, copywriters have ideas, and they need jingle guys to put music to them. So when I say I wrote the Flintstone Vitamins jingle, Jim takes umbrage a little bit because he wrote the actual We Are Flintstones Kids, 10 Million Strong and Growing. But there I'm saying it, it's on paper. We Are Flintstones Kids, 10 Million Strong and Growing.
Right.
Barring until the music.
Well, exactly. It's like composer and lyricist.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, but he was actually a friend. He's a cool guy. I still talk to him.
Is he bringing you back for the sequel? The Flintstone Vitamins.
The sequel.
Assembled.
Well, we did so many of those commercials, but the very first one, he said, "Look, I need to get a demo on this. There's a different concept that we're pitching to the client. This is sort of the B version that the agency is not behind, but I think it's the better idea. But they're not putting any money into this demo, so we need you to do as a friend. Would you do a free demo?" And so we did. We did it in our little studio, playing the piano, me and Mike singing this thing, which was horrible. I mean, just horrific. But it was like, hey, we got to do it for free. Like, at this point, we're getting paid for demos, right? So I was like, well, we'll do this free demo. And we didn't try very hard. And Jim came and listened to it, and he was like, gosh, thanks. That's really appreciate it. I know I didn't have any money, so thanks for doing this. And then I remember thinking and talking to Mike, it's like he was not happy with that. And I'm not happy with it. That was bad. We need to do this again. We need to get kids singing something. We need to write a new one. And Mike's like, what? We did it for free. What are you talking about? I'm like, let's go to a better studio, get a better piano. Let's get your daughters. At that time, Mike's daughters were like 6 and 4 or something.
Perfect.
7 and 5, I forget. And I said, let's get them to sing it. So Mike went home and wrote one, and I wrote one, and we compared it the next day. So I'm going deeper than anybody knows.
This is the definitive.
Okay.
No one will ever have to ask you for this story again. It's amazing. We're going to do 2 episodes. It's going to be about game industry, and then there's going to be like this bonus Flintstones history.
So I drove over to Mike's house. Lisa and Jana, his daughters, were standing there, and Mike says, okay, I got him. He's got his guitar. And they started singing this jingle. I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. That's pretty good. I said, but let me show you mine. And they had a piano there, so I played them the piano and I sang it. And Mike's like, oh, Marty, I think this got too much syncopation. It's going to be hard for the kids. I'm like, Lisa, Jana, we are Flintstones kids, 10 million strong and growing. And boom, they just repeated it instantly. And I'm like, okay, Mike, I rest my case. Plus, then I pulled out my USC.
You subsequently disowned them.
Yes, I pulled out my USC training on him. And I said, look, the high point of your melody is 10 million strong and growing. It's like 10 million. The highest point in your melody is lion. It's horrible. Mine is 10
no one
million
in history
strong.
remembers a yun high point. That's a challenge.
And so he goes, yeah, you're right. We'll do your version. So that's we
so
both
funny.
did one, and mine won because I pulled out a composition theory.
Well, the
thing.
lost Mike Salvatore Flintstone's vitamin is something else we got to find.
We
dig
should.
up.
We should. I don't think we ever recorded it, but that's too bad.
So what I love about this, so then just the tail end of that, then you re-recorded it.
Yeah.
You took it back to him, kind of
Yeah, he
unprompted,
wasn't. He was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did this because I wasn't going to play that horrible thing you gave me for free. But now this is so much better, and he became the star of the agency at that point because they showed this other big, concept to the client, and the client like, no, we like that 10 million strong thing better, and then they went with that, and there are still some version of that going on today.
Oh,
which
I don't
is
doubt it.
Ridiculous.
I don't doubt it. So here's what I love about that story, and to kind of keep it, to wrap it back to sort of the general themes of what we talk about here. There are a lot of composers, and you must have met, hundreds or thousands of like students and people like that over the years, and I've had my share of those kinds of conversations also, and I'm always interested to hear a story that has a wonderful sort of lesson into it. And in particular, this one, a subject that comes up all the time is on the notion of when you do things for free or not. And there's this kind of current that I see more and more of people saying, like, it's just wrong. It's immoral. It's predatory on the part of the producers. They are using us. They hate us. They're vultures. And I just say, that is, I'm sure that once that was true, like not meaning like there is an incident somewhere that happened. Okay, sometimes people are shitty, but generally speaking, it's all about relationships. And when you have an earnest relationship with someone, it's natural to want to do something. And I especially love that it was eating away at you that like, oh man, we can do better than that. And there's just this need for it to be better, even though it's not even the gig, it's the demo for the gig.
Yeah.
And it's an unpaid one where you had become quite accustomed to not being unpaid for that. Right. But look at what that led to.
It's a really good lesson, and I took it to heart at the time. I thought, oh my gosh, if I hadn't listened to that little inner voice, we wouldn't have gone back to redo it, and we wouldn't have gotten this jingle that ended up like it was. It's also an ASCAP registered piece, so it's still in your I sang
statements.
I sang with the kids from the very beginning.
Oh, smart.
And so, Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah, I was going to say,
then Mike's daughters, my daughter, who lives here in Las Vegas, was the girl who ended up, when she was 5, she came in and did "And Growing" with just this slight little, almost like she had a cold, and she was really cute. And she ended up being the one that the clients liked. So she ended up being the "And Growing" girl for, we just kept reusing
until she stopped
that.
growing.
She was well into her teens, I think, and we were still using "And Growing" from her recording.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but it's in the back of my mind that all of that could have been for naught if I had just been, no, I'm not doing anything for free. And it was like, okay, well, I think what you're saying is like it had to do with the relationship, it had to do with an opportunity, and it had to do with something where I knew that we didn't do our best work, and it's time to just do it. And when I talk to people about, especially young composers, I basically say, look, I'd rather you do it for free than cheap.
Yeah,
because
I completely agree.
If you're cheap, you'll always be cheap. The client will think you're cheap. But if you say, well, I'm not going to do it for that paltry amount, but I'll do it for free because I think this is important. I mean, it's better because then you can be higher priced later.
Yeah, and it also it goes from being a very low end professional arrangement to be cheap to then when it becomes free, it's now a personal exchange.
Yeah.
It becomes this is something happening between us, which is very different in tone and potential, I think,
Yeah.
than just like, well, look, my rate is $100, and meanwhile, person over there, it's $20,000, and it's like one makes you big and the other one makes you small in some sense. And I think
free doesn't make you small.
Totally agree. And
Yeah.
what I also love is that you were not. You were well into your career, that you had a few years of experience, because there's often this story or variations of this end up getting framed as, okay, well, yeah, when you're a student, you do it for free, or when you're just getting started, that makes sense. But I love that you had reason to reject this professionally on paper, but the human said, I don't think so, and that the career took a wild turn as a result. I just think there's just so much to take away from that. That's so valuable, and people really need to hear it, because I see seemingly daily, I see this notion of this very reductive black and white take that makes it sound like if you do a favor for somebody, or if you just want to do something, if you just see something and you're like, I just want to be a part of what you have going on here.
Especially, I think, in today's game development environment, the tools are out there, and you got to cut your teeth on the tools anyway.
Absolutely.
And most composers are probably not game designers, but they probably, especially when they're young, they probably have friends who are playing around with Unreal or Unity or doing something
more than ever, I would think.
And those people need someone who has knowledge and some chops that come have to do with music and sound. So work with your friends, because your friends turn into something later.
Absolutely.
It's not to be manipulative or take advantage of things, but like that's the way things work.
The way I always frame that is, I say, go out and just genuinely make friends with people, because the worst case outcome of that is you have a friend. Like if they don't turn into the person that hires you to do the Flintstones vitamin jingle, or offer a job at Bungie or whatever to make the next great game, they're your friend. How is that a negative outcome?
Not a negative. And the thing to watch out for, and everyone will run into this, and I'm sure you have too, is when you have the friendly sort of client who takes advantage of things. They go, Marty, I know you're $20,000, but I only got $5,000, and I'll get you next time.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but let's see how that works. They never get you next time.
Right. Sure.
So when you finally start accepting money to do things, you have to. You don't have to draw a line in the sand, but you have to realize that whatever you are charging, or whatever you are getting, whatever you are willing to accept, make sure that at some point at 2:00 in the morning, and you're still struggling to get something done, and you're like, doggone it, we're not getting paid enough for this.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're not getting paid enough for it, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And
the
people who take advantage of that, we'll get you next time. They never get you next time.
Yeah. No, it's true. That's also a good lesson. Some people kind of, and I can honestly, I can even empathize a bit with their perspective of like, if the quality has come in consistently on that budget, it becomes difficult to justify going and finding more when you've kind of already got everything you need.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it becomes a balancing act. And obviously the more personal the relationship, often the easier to be able to be candid and say, look, I know we've been doing this at sort of 25% the rate. How can we address that?
Exactly.
And the people that really care, they tend to say, you know what, you're absolutely right.
And you have, I'm going to ask you something now. Have you how much are your clients mostly kind of in the smaller indie side of things, or do you have?
Runs the gamut.
Okay.
It runs the gamut. I've certainly done a lot of those, but even then I've done a handful of the so-called AA or AA or whatever.
Okay.
Kind of games.
Yeah.
I've worked on games where I had bigger and more elaborate recording sessions for a game that had overall a smaller budget than XYZ, right? More sort of typically AAA, but I've worked. Yeah, it's been the range.
Sure.
But you haven't including the absolute. Let's just make a game together. No one's getting paid. From that all the way up to like Assassin's Creed, where it's the hard opposite of that.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering. But you were freelance still, right? You've
I've
always been freelance.
I've never. Yeah, exactly. I've never even. The closest I ever came to flirting with that was I got a call once after Journey came out. I got a very nice call from you probably know Mike Moraski at Valve, and he was like, "I'm just curious, kind of what your deal is, because we didn't know each other. He just reached out, and I was a big admirer already of his, so I was very thrilled to be talking to him. But I said, I can't imagine myself ever having a desk job or a staff job or anything like that. I would have a hard time conforming to what's needed for that. I think my process is very driven by sort of curiosity, and that's a little now there probably are. I have friends who make that work amazingly, and God knows that the body of work that you have, I would never have guessed that the things I attribute to a staff job or an audio director type position that I would have assumed are limiting, your work doesn't seem to indicate that. But obviously that's what we're here to unpack. So.
Yes, and you need to know that I invented the term audio director. So,
well, let's. I think I'm almost ready to get out of 1985.
Yes.
So let's. Because around the mid 90s or so was when you first dipped your toes in the game.
Yeah, what happened, and I had a friend who had a radio show in Chicago, and his son. So my friend knew that I had a recording studio in Chicago. At this point now, we're early 90s, and we were pretty well established. We were just off Michigan Avenue. It was a big deal. Yeah. And so this friend of mine said, "Oh, I have my 18-year-old son is coming to visit. He would love to see your studio. He likes music. He's about to start at the University of Washington. And could you show him the studio?" And I'm like, "Sure, of course, Dick." His name is Dick Staub. And so his son came to visit, Josh Staub. And he was 18, and he came to my studio downtown. And I was showing him all the stuff and all the gear and how it all worked, and he thought it was cool. And then he saw that I had on my shelves some computer games. And he said, "Oh, you like computer games?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually, it's sort of a hobby. I love computer games." He goes, "Yeah, well, I just spending the summer working with my friends who make computer games." And I'm like, "Oh, where is this again?" He goes, "In Spokane, Washington." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, Spokane." I don't know, for like 18-year-old kid, friends in Spokane make computer games. I completely thought it couldn't be much of anything.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I have a beta version on a CD-ROM." And I went like, "Oh, well, come over to my house tonight." So he came over to my house, put the CD-ROM in, and up comes, well, it didn't come up right away. He actually had to call this guy on the phone and say, "What do I type in to make it work?"
I love it.
Oh, it's like you have to do a special code for HyperCard
yeah.
so that Myst could come up. So
a beta
of Myst in my house before anybody in the world saw it, basically. And it came up. I heard the music. I heard Robin Miller's music. I saw the sound. I saw the visuals. The sound design. I played it. Josh was sitting next to me, and literally for the next 6 hours, I just ignored him and just played.
You're like, just here's the keys. Here are my credit cards. Take care of yourself.
Go do what you need to do. But he actually really enjoyed watching me play. At least that's what he tells me. And he's an Academy Award-winning lighting animator, producer at Disney, and is at Disney now. And he's probably old. I'm sure he's older than you. So there you go.
What was his role going to be with Myst at that point then?
Well, he was just at that point. He was just sort of helping his friends, his older.
But like on the
friends.
Art, like if he was.
Well, he was an art guy, and he knew computers pretty well. But he was, as an 18-year-old, he was just sort of play testing for them and helping them sort of do some stuff. At the time, I think he was also helping them do the colorized version of this game called Spelunks, which very few people know about. It's a Cyan game. It's from Cyan. It's actually a fun game. I wish they should bring that back. But anyway,
we'll give him a call. Tell him I got a job for you.
Yeah, he called me like a month later, and he was about to start at the University of Washington. And he said, "Hey, Marty, I just wanted to tell you that I'm about to start school, but my friends Robin and Rand called me, and they want me to come work for them full time." And I said, "On what?" He says, "Well, on the next game that they're doing, the sequel to Myst." And I said, what would you be doing? He says, well, they want me to be like an art director. And I'm like, goodness sakes. Because he just naturally was good at
Wow.
3D graphics. And so I said, what do you want to take? What are you going to be a major when you go to the university? And he said, well, computer graphics. And I'm like, okay, well, don't go to school, go work for them, because they're going to go so far ahead of whatever academics are going to do. And the worst possible case is this whole thing falls apart in 2 years and you go back to school.
Yeah, right.
And by the time you're 25, nobody cares how you got a degree or not got a degree. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
So he's like, okay, this is my version of the story. He probably has a totally different version. But I got an angry call from his father. Like, what did you tell my son? He's like, he said, especially his mother was not happy that I told him not to go to school. I said, yeah, don't worry. He's going to be fine. So I saw him. I saw his son is now at USC.
Oh, wow.
Or a friend of his son's at USC. Anyway, I spoke at USC a year ago, and I saw this kid who said, oh, I know Josh Staub's son. And I'm like, oh, thanks for making me feel old. But I talked to Josh, and I said, I take credit for your career. And he says, no, I take credit for your career.
Well, then let's get to that stage.
So, because immediately, as soon as I saw this game, I'm like, Josh, I need to meet your friends. Because that's when I realized in 1992, maybe, is that when that game came out?
I thought Myst was more like 94, 95, but I would trust your take better than mine. Our diligent army
we got
of
our
Googlers.
staff.
Yeah,
We're going to
exactly.
look it up. 92, 93. Okay, anyway. He, 93.
93.
Okay.
Myst,
Thanks.
93.
Myst,
2
93.
would have been what then? 94, 95?
Yeah, something like that.
So
But
you saw
as
the
soon as
writing
I
on the
saw that,
wall.
I thought, oh, this fun little hobby that has bad audio and bad voice acting, if there is any voice acting, and small 8-bit mono sounds and cheesy music that is repetitive. And not that I didn't love like the Zelda music and the Mario music.
No,
but it just wasn't like, okay, that's something I want to do.
No, it's funny how I relate to that completely, because I have a lot of friends who grew up where they accepted at face value, Uematsu's early music, Koji Kondo, all of the kind of godfathers of these.
And I
of
met
these,
both those guys. They're super sweet,
and
talented, amazing guys.
amazing
And I'm older than
talents.
them, so there you go.
amazing talent, undoubtedly. But it's funny because my diet was like Jerry Goldsmith.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when I heard that stuff, I thought, that's...
You're stealing my stuff. That's my favorite guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was his birthday just 2 days ago, so he's on the mind. But he would have been 91.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
But yeah, so I was never. It took a long time for me to be as impressed as a lot of my friends with the early 8-bit, particularly in 16-bit even music, because I was actively comparing it to like the London Symphony at Abbey Road, right? And so to me, it just lost the arms race.
Yeah.
And I had a hard time appreciating what was below the sound of it.
Yeah.
And now I can
Me
look
too.
at it and say, there's some genuinely brilliant writing there.
Oh,
but I had a bias
agree.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
So when
you're seeing that potential, though, right at the turning point.
Yeah, it's
CD-ROM
right when
is, becoming a thing.
And I saw that they were approaching games, sound design, story, and music a more cinematic approach, not a linear approach. It was still this nonlinear, medium, which was really cool. But they took this stuff seriously. So there wasn't levels and there wasn't level music that was repetitive, and it was very scory and it was very atmospheric, and it was like, okay, wait a minute. If I don't jump into this, it's going to just pass me by.
Yeah.
It's like Tim Sweeney today said something about starting in 92 or whatever it is, about the same time I did, 92, 93. He thought he was too late, which is hilarious.
Wow.
But I did too.
Amazing.
I thought I'm too old. It's, all the heavy lifting has been done. There's no place to go. I was just hoping maybe I can catch the tail end.
That's incredible.
So I did. I eventually met Robin and Rand and convinced them that they should hire me to be audio something on Riven, which was the sequel to Myst.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole long story there because Tim Larkin ended up coming in a little bit later. Tim and I are good friends now, but like at the time, we're like, Riven was a difficult project for everybody involved because they had so much wild success with Mist
Yeah.
that they, and it's like everybody's sophomore attempt, right? It's the second
course.
thing. It just was really tough. So just to get that thing finished and out the door, and we were in Chicago, and the publisher was in San Francisco, and Robin and Rand and Cyan were in Spokane.
So you started working for them remotely.
Yes.
So that's obviously a very different thing.
And we were freelance, obviously. So I know the freelance thing.
So you were, interesting. So you had this kind of nebulously audio guru title for them.
They brought me out. And I stayed at Robin Miller's house, and I saw something that they were doing at a local Spokane TV studio. And they were trying to shoot some blue screen stuff there as tests. And I'm like, wow, I've been in enough sets that I knew that they were in over their heads. So Robin said, well, what did you think of today's shoot? And I'm like, well, okay, so who's your lighting director? What's that? I mean, was there? I couldn't tell who the gaffer was. Who was the director? I was asking him questions that were from my film background.
Right. Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. There were some lights that are in Stratovision 3D, and we were looking for those lights. So there were people there helping us to find those lights that we have. And I'm like, wow, no, so you're trying to reinvent something that's already been, like, blue screen is already.
Yeah. They solved that one.
They solved this. So first of all, I said, well, Robin, this is me. Once again, my memory of it. There are directors, and there are producers, and there are creative directors, and there's art directors, and at that time, I did the thing that I always wanted to do, which is I always felt that in the movie business, there should be an audio director. And there is no such thing as audio director. Yeah. So I said, and you need an audio director. And that's how I invented the term audio director. So that's 1990, whatever it is, 94.
But that was a freelance
95.
Position, though.
Yes. So I was trying to sneak myself in as, like, you should hire me as audio director. Of course, I wasn't. Everybody else, Robin was immediately art director, and Rand was creative director, and Richard was second art director. I mean, they all took titles.
Right.
Because they liked all the titles that I presented to them. But they gave me, like, sound design dude or something.
Interesting. So obviously that got your feet planted.
Mm-hmm.
Was that primarily in a sound, like, because you weren't really part of the music team or music?
Well, that was my goal
aspect at that stage, though.
Right. What my goal was to be, like I say, audio director. So my vision at that time was, like, anything that's going to come out of the speakers is my vision.
Now, what gave you that? Because I assume that up to this point, it was still very primarily commercial jingles and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very constrained to music, I assume. They're not really, or am I wrong? Or are you weighing in on sound design and voice acting and all that?
Interesting that you should ask that. So if you think about the
mid
to late 80s and early 90s, if you think about the technology, having to depend on a big recording studio, which is what everybody was used to. Well, the technology got better and better. You had the DA-88, which is a digital 8-track recorder. We built better and better demo studios and made them more and more soundproof. Suddenly, our demos that we would hire a voiceover to come in, we could do the voiceover there, and it sounded finished.
Yeah.
And I could hire a small chunk of musicians and have them sweeten something up. I could hire a couple singers, and the three of us would get in the booth. We had an audio booth. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't want to go to another final mix at some big outside mixing studio where the person sitting at the desk is the re-recording mixer and the sound editor.
Right.
And I'm maybe in the audience going, please, sir, can I have some more?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is an ego thing, which I know you can identify with.
Really? We'll have to unpack that next.
No, I don't mean, I'm joking, of course. But what I see in you is that same sort of, like, energy to, like, push forward.
Well, and I'm also a big fan of like, I love how the technology has and it was beginning then. It's extreme now. It kind of democratized the process where anybody can do basically all of it.
Yeah, and so I would sit at some of these mixes, and sometimes it was like it's a film mix, and all of a sudden the voice is like way too loud to me, or even the music is covering something up. Then I thought, well, gee, I thought the music was going to be more subtext here rather than whatever. But you weren't invited there to make any comments. Right. It was lucky if you were invited to the final mix.
But it's clear that you were aimed at the final product. You were not there, as like, it's convenient that your commercial is a platform for my music. Like, you definitely saw it as a commercial that has these constituent parts.
Yes. And so you basically have sound effects, dialogue, and music in just about everything we're doing, right?
Right.
And I see them as like three aspects of the same thing.
Exactly.
The audience only has two ears. Whatever is coming out of the speakers, that's what they hear, that's what they absorb.
Was that a normal, did that set you apart, or was that relatively common in kind of amongst your peers?
It was 100% unique. No one ever in the history.
I mean, well,
I don't know. I didn't have a lot of conversations. Most people who had been around the business for a while, they were just like, no, why are you fighting this? This is the system. Right. And I was just like, because I feel like if we could have our hands on the final mix, we would make it better, because then I would know that I created an explosion for this one moment. And so that way I didn't do timpani and cymbal on that. I put a hole in the music.
I love it.
And then I knew the dialogue, the voiceover was going to start talking here. So I'm going to go under him, and then I'm going to come up at the end. Whatever it is, I had a vision for, like, it's an audio thing.
Yeah.
And I want to be in charge of that. I want to be the audio director of anything that I'm doing. But in the commercial and film world, I could not be an audio director. There was no place for it. So I thought, well, here's this new medium called games.
This lighthouse basically calling to you.
Maybe I could pretend like this is the way it's done and just slide into that role. So that's
I love it. Basically, it's like the old west of walking into a town and declaring yourself a sheriff. Because they have never heard of such a thing, and so you're like, well, that's just I was sent from the big city out east, and that's the job. Well, so then how long before you left Chicago then, and this transition sort of, because now we're in this early sort of game industry prologue stage.
So in '96, I talked to Mike, my business partner, and I said, I think we're going to get this Riven gig, and I want to know what the game business is all about. So I saw that there was this computer game developers conference in Santa Clara. Mm-hmm. So I bought a ticket, and then I went there and tried to see who the competition was and what people are doing, what the business was. And I came back from that thinking, you know what? I think this is a legitimate place to make a living. And this is not so late in the game that that we can't make an impact here, and I can't do some cool stuff. So we immediately started looking around for more jobs than the Riven one, and almost immediately ran into Bungie, who was right down the street, believe it or not, in Chicago. And
I never knew that.
Yeah, so at the same time I'm working on Riven, we got the job to work on Myth: The Fallen Lords. And on Myth: The Fallen Lords, they made me audio director.
Now, was that the same thing? Were you convincing them of a need that they didn't know they had?
Yes.
Well done.
But on that one, I thought I was going to be more involved in the music on Riven, and I went to Robin's house and I showed him some new gear. They were so successful on Myst, he could buy anything he wanted. Mm-hmm. So I sort of helped him, get his home studio set up. And then I kept thinking at some point, we're going to collaborate on the music. But Robin was just, he waited so long, and it's just like, no, sound design, you can do that. But, he wanted to own the music, and that's fine. Sure. That was great. But immediately as I'm working with Bungie, they're like, yeah, we need you to do music. And we think we don't know how to hire voiceover and, sound effects and implementation and the whole thing. I had the whole thing right there. So actually, Myth: The Fallen Lords was really my first full game where I was like the audio director on all aspects of the audio.
Yeah.
And that came out the same year, believe it or not, 97. So
as Riven.
Yeah.
It's not a bad first year.
was a good first year.
It's interesting because it's you've had multiple first years then as a result.
Well, this was an interesting thing because it was like midlife. I'm going to change careers, and I had to sort of convince Mike that we should change careers because we were having successful.
Sounds like that's
work.
the second time that.
Oh, I always have to convince Mike. That's
he was
just
he was kind of weighing the. That's funny.
But he's
You've dragged him from one
I
success
have.
to the
I
next.
keep dragging him along when we, and he's told me that it's like, I'm the one that has the sort of crazy visionary, epiphanies, and he's happy to go along. He sort of trusts my instincts now, finally, after whatever it is, 50 years or something. But yeah, anyway, that's how that went.
Well, so 1997. So then, at what point then? So when you were initially hired as audio director, then at Bungie.
Well, I was hired
still
freelance, but
so then,
as the audio director, freelance on their games.
Okay, yeah, correct. That makes sense. So then, at what point did that then change?
So now we can at least get up to 1990 now. So in 99,
almost ready to leave the leave the 20th century.
So in 99,
it's a 6-part podcast, by the way, that's going to be on PBS.
It should be. In 99, we had this opportunity. We were working on this game. At the time, it was called Blam.
Blam?
I think it was first called Monkey Nuts. And it
sounds like a nice reflection of the general sort of maturity of the industry as it's come along.
No, I used to walk into Bungie. There were literally, I think this is, in the late 90s, there were probably 30 people working there, 32, 33, something like that. And it was always like walking into someone's college dorm after a bad weekend. I mean, it's just like sweat socks on the floor and empty pizza boxes, almost empty pizza boxes, and a certain smell permeating throughout everything.
Very charming.
And I remember thinking that of all I think there was one woman that worked there at the time, but of all the guys who worked there, none of them had girlfriends, certainly didn't have wives or kids or girlfriends,
absolute
or even a possibility of a girlfriend.
Cliche of, it's just the quintessential stereotype.
Yes. And here I already had a successful business downtown and family, wife and children and the whole thing. I was like, it was a very
You're the one who had figured out how to be an adult.
Yes. So that's why I became Marty the Elder. Because like even that many years ago.
One of those things I was going to ask you where that.
That sort of turned into the thing. So, but we hit it off really well. We did Myth. We did the sequel to Myth. So while the sequel to Myth 2 was being worked on and coming out, there was also a small team in a secret corner doing this other thing, originally called Monkey Nuts, turned into Blam, and it became Halo. And in the July of 99, we got this opportunity through a whole bunch of circuitous things to show Halo for the first time to the world at Macworld in New York, introduced by Steve Jobs. And I was like, I've been waiting for this. This is the thing. I've been waiting for this opportunity.
How long were you working on it up before that unveiling?
We had been working on it maybe, I think it was in some sort of development for about a year, maybe 8 months. And it had just turned into this really cool 3D engine that worked on a PC. And everything I was doing was just sound design for the PC. And I mean, even rudimentary multi-discrete speakers, Creative Labs had something that was not 5.1, but it was sort of 5.1-y. So a rocket launcher being launched at my head would explode behind me, and that was cool.
Yeah.
And we had this little demo that was very cool on the PC, and suddenly it was like, oh, well, since we were also going to be on a Mac eventually, Steve Jobs said, yeah, I want to show this game. I want to show off OpenGL, which was a new open platform for graphics. And we need this demo. And of course, we had no sound support at all. We had nothing to support that. So the developers at the studio just started working crazily to get some sort of a playable demo.
Wow. Scripted
playable demo for Steve Jobs. And I went in and said, we have no sound support, but let me do a track that supports it, and we can put on a show. It's a smoke and mirrors thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it didn't even play out of the engine. The music itself played on a CD that somebody hit play on the CD. At the same time, Jason Jones hit the space bar, which started the script.
You know, what's funny is I feel like in some ways that still hasn't changed.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, because how many trailer reveals at E3 say things like rendered in engine as a way to try to say, like, we know that you're suspicious of how this looks.
Yes.
And I love that it's
this
like
will never
all the way
ship
back to
that
99
way.
or so.
Yeah, 99. So they gave me, I said to them, I said, look, this is a big deal. This is Steve Jobs, Macworld New York. He had just come back to Apple. We got to take advantage of this. It's a, captive audience, dark house, big screen. Let me blow out the doors on this production, which meant I'm going to hire live musicians.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I did a talk at Game Sound Con and showed some of the behind the scenes on that. And in my head over the years, the number of musicians that I had hired grows. And I look back, I had less strings than the Beatles had on Eleanor Rigby. I had 6 strings, 4 violins, 2 cellos.
That's funny.
That was it. And I faked the violas, although I had the cellos play up. I
made it work.
multed the cellos over and over and the violins down. So I had everybody covering everything in some way. And then I had 3 other singers between me and Mike that did the chant. And they were jingle singers. They were the Mr. Clean guys. Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean. And so was I. So I'm out there with them. We just had done Mr. Clean, and now we're going to go. Oh.
Wait, you wrote that one?
Well, Mr. Clean was originally written in the 50s, but they brought it back in the 80s and 90s, and we did all the Mr. Clean commercials.
You're the Mr. Clean cover artist or remasterer.
Oh yeah, we had to make one sound like.
I didn't know that it went that far back.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. If you hear that, you can watch original Mr. Clean black and white commercials. So we did the updated ones that started during the
back
TV.
when he had hair, I guess.
Yes, during the heyday of 30-something. Do you remember 30-something?
Yeah, sure.
Remember that sort of D50, Roland D50 chiffy flute sound that they had?
Snuffy Walden.
Yes, very good.
I do know it. It's kind of blurry, but yeah.
Why do you even know that? That's amazing. So we had to do like the 30-something hip family Mr. Clean jingle.
That's so funny. So the Mr. Clean jingle singers are the original Halo
Monks.
sort of Gregorian, monks, monk chanting.
I had hired those guys.
I can't believe I'm hearing that for the first time.
Yeah, I had hired those guys to do Gregorian chant kinds of things for me before, so I knew they could do it. And I also wanted
Tidy Cat, presumably.
No, actually, it could have been. Now that I think about it, I had hired them. I think Principal Financial Group and some other things.
I love it.
Yeah,
that's just so funny. So, okay, I want to talk about that because with all like, not to sound flattering, but I mean.
No, go ahead.
I'm not the first. Well, okay, I was going to say, I know I'm not the first to say it, but I mean, that theme is definitely like one of the iconic themes, like of the pantheon of game scores. It is one of the ones. And I'll tell you, I remember I did a bunch of shows as you have as well with our mutual friend, Tommy Talarico.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point along the road, a few orchestras that I've worked with would reach out to me to say, basically, can you help us make our own version of that kind of thing? And I would just give them programming suggestions and then reach out to folks and say, do you have score and parts on this? And blah, blah, blah. And I remember Tommy caught wind of that one point and offered, to give advice or something. And he said, do you want to know my number one piece of advice? If you really want to make the show work, just always add more Halo.
Yay, Tommy.
And yeah, it was that was the one thing he had to tell me. It's just it always works.
Tommy and I are good friends, and he's had me down to what's the Lucas studio, Skywalker Ranch, because he's re-recorded stuff, and he had me down for that. So anyway, but the circling back around, we'll get out of the 90s really soon, but back to 96 when I went to.
I'm still in denial that we left 1985. So
seeing just computer game developers conference before it was just game developers conference. So at that point, it didn't really have any representation from PlayStation. I mean, '96. I'm not even sure if there was a PlayStation or Nintendo. There were no consoles that it was represented.
Oh, interesting.
It was
Purely
computer
PC
games.
game
It was
world,
PC
basically.
And in some little hall there was a token Mac. Yeah. So when I went there to see who the competitors were, walking down the hall was this guy with spangled Texas outfit and cowboy hats and other people dressed like him. And that apparently was this guy named the Fat Man.
Yep.
I'm like, well, he's
Mr.
not
Sanger.
fat. So, and then I saw another guy, this short Italian guy with gold lame jacket and a bevy of beauties on his arms.
Yeah.
And that was Tommy Talarico. I'm like, okay, that's another one. And then there was a guy who had a couple of guys, and they all had these leather jackets on. On the back of the leather jacket, it said Sound Deluxe. And that was Scott Gershon. So I met those three guys right away. And I thought, yeah, I could take these guys. But, it was funny. It was like that very first little game conference, I met like the three top people who were working in games at the time. And it was really fun. We hit it off. Although I'm not sure George remembers meeting me. I think he was even further higher up than anybody. But Tommy and I laugh about George and I laugh about it too, but like I think George has sort of forgotten whether he met me then. But it was interesting because I thought, well, even if they're always going to take the top gigs, I think this industry is going to grow big enough that I'll find room for myself in here. So anyway, that's Tommy coming around.
I love it. Well, so yeah, the Tommy correctly said always add more Halo. So I just want to know where this theme came from. I'm sure you've done a million interviews where you were asked this, so forgive me for hitting the rudimentary meat and
I'm shocked
here.
You haven't just listened to all of my interviews.
Well, it's I'm sure I have. The question is, have the listeners of this podcast? So walk us through. I mean, the obviously the monk, the kind of Gregorian chanting, that was very novel, and also just from a production standpoint, that's right at that turning point where it was starting to show glimpses that maybe these things are going to be recorded on a semi-regular basis, because even just 1 year prior to that, it's like if you had anything remotely approaching live instruments, you were hot shit, and or technologically impossible, So it's right at that line, and you seem to capitalize on the bandwidth that the technology was allowing, but also with a very novel, very ungame-like choice for those days. And how did that happen?
Well, like I said, I had done. Well, let's go back to USC for 1 second. I promise.
Oh, we're back in the 80s.
Yes,
I love it.
I was also, when I was there, besides taking a class with David Raxon, I was in a group called the Early Music Ensemble, and because I had been a piano major and also a flute minor, I play some flute
minor.
Yeah. But I wasn't a flute minor after I became a composition major, because then I was just a composition major. But I still play the flute. I still to this day can pick it up and make sounds.
Wow.
But it was fun to be in this early music ensemble, and I did things like change ringing, which is this cool British old English bell thing, and learned how to play recorders of all sizes. And I could play bass recorder because my fingers were bigger than most of the other people playing, because it was all girls. And I played.
Is this the early stage of like the classic rock star story of people say, "Why'd you get into music?"
Yeah, to get girls.
I got into the early music ensemble to meet the ladies.
So wonderful. But I played Renaissance flutes, which are just like tubes with holes in them.
Yeah.
And I played the bass Renaissance flute because it was about the size of a baseball bat, and I could actually get my fingers on it. So, but along with that, they had. I always liked, even when I was an undergraduate, I enjoyed early music and I loved the Middle Ages music studies course, and I loved Gregorian chant and Liber Usualis, and I studied it a little bit more. And then we had a chant group that sang Gregorian chants in the early music ensemble. So it's just something that's always been in my head as something that is a beautiful thing.
So had you kind of dipped into that vocabulary for other stuff before?
Yeah, like I said, I think I actually dipped into it for like the Principal Financial Group.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it was just bizarre. I was just every once in a while I was like, hey, this would be a nice little moment to have this sort of echoey men's Gregorian chant deal. And I think even in Myth: The Fallen Lords, or maybe Myth 2, there was with fake voices, I think I did a little something in there that had that sort of feel. So it didn't seem like necessarily a big leap to go for Halo. But what happened was this opportunity to show at Macworld New York in '99 happened like on a Thursday, and it was going to be live on the next Tuesday. So like the guys brought it to me at Bungie. They called me over and said, we got to do this thing. And I'm like, I'm going to hire an orchestra and a real recording studio and real singers.
The orchestra of 4 violins and 2 cellos?
Exactly. But at the time, that's actually wasn't a bad thing because we
not
multed
a bad
it.
thing.
Yeah,
it's
you can mult it with fake stuff, and then you
like
mult
you said,
the
Eleanor
reals.
Rigby. You don't need much.
That's right. So anyway, I said, okay, well, what are we trying to do? And it's like I remember Joe Staten, who was the writer at the time, and he was going to script this demo. He just said, I said, how long is it going to be? He goes, it's 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Joe,
Composers.
this is happening on Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in the studio
5 to
recording
10.
on Monday. Can you give me anything closer to that? He goes, no, 2 to 3 minutes. So like, I had no idea. So I had to make something. I had to write something that I knew was exciting in the middle and sort of smushy on the ends. So in case I had to shorten it or lengthen it, I could do it almost in the studio.
Sure.
And I said, okay, what's at this point? All I knew was like there was this cool warthog you could drive around that had a inverse kinematic, whatever it's called, physics thing that made the antenna on the back wobble in a really cool way. And there was a rocket launch, some sort of rocket launcher that was cool. That's all I knew at the time. So we didn't have a story. We didn't have Master Chief. We had
Screams
nothing.
Gregorian chant.
Exactly. So
wobbling antennas.
now I'm saying, what are you going to show? Give me some idea of what it is. And he sort of tried to describe this scenario that was going to happen. I didn't see anything. I just knew what I had been playing. And then he said, he says, I think it needs to sound ancient and epic and mysterious. I'm like, okay, that's all I need. Ancient, epic, mysterious, and
like the financial group.
Yes. So I thought, well, ancient is Gregorian chant. That's why there's Gregorian chant in Halo, because Joe Staten said it needs to give you a feeling of ancient. And I thought that's instantaneous. As soon as you hear Gregorian chant, you think old.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah, so that's the only it was. And then as on the way to Mike's studio, at this point, the studio was back in Mike's house because our studio had burned down, believe it or not, a few months before. So now we were reforming in Mike's basement. And I was on the way to his house, and I thought, okay, Gregorian chant. I thought about different Gregorian chant melodies I knew. I thought about, believe it or not, yesterday. Yesterday.
Very lyrical.
I was thinking about the 4 phrases of yesterday, 1 high point, 1 low point. And I thought, okay, I'll write something that's E Dorian, sounds like a chant, but isn't a chant. This chant doesn't exist in the Liber. So, and I came in and I said to Mike, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be some sort of chant thing at the beginning. And I sang it to him and he goes, oh, yeah, okay.
Works.
It works. And then I said, and then we need to get like big chugging epic cello orchestra thing with percussion. So he's like, okay, let's go. And that's how that happened.
Obviously I guess that went well. So at what point,
and then Paul McCartney years later.
No, believe me, we're getting to that.
Oh, okay.
We're getting to that because I was going to say, all right, between yesterday now and Eleanor Rigby, we're dancing at the periphery of that, the tweet that broke the internet.
Gosh.
So, how long before the game actually shipped proper from this initial Macworld demo?
That was July of '99, and we shipped in November of 2001.
Okay, so then there were a couple more years in round terms.
And of course, we didn't get purchased by Microsoft until May of 2000. And all of a sudden, we went from being a PC and Mac game to we're going to be a launch title for the Xbox. And no one knew what the Xbox was. We had no clue how we were going to do Halo on an Xbox. That was a very scary time.
How much did any of that play out specifically for you, like having to figure out audio specs of Xbox compared to where you were? I mean, did that completely throw all your plans for a loop?
Yes, it was starting from scratch.
It can be relatively safe that like the aesthetics may not change or whatever, but
by the time
the implementation and the hardware and constraints and all that are going to be potentially radical.
Yeah, once we did the Macworld demo and then we did a demo at E3, we still didn't have that much of a game. We had a couple of fun trailery demo type things that were playable. And I had kept the sort of monks and big orchestra feel with percussion. I kept that feeling for these things that were Sully, right? They were marketing pieces really. But I didn't know what the game was going to be and then I joined Bungie on May 1st of 2000. And then we went on May 10th, we went to E3 with the big 10-minute demo. And that's when Microsoft said, we want to buy Bungie. And I had just joined them as an employee 10 days earlier. And so Alex Seropian, who was the owner at the time of Bungie, said, hey, Marty, look, I understand, your family's here, you got business here. Because Mike was still running O'Donnell Salvatore, the commercial studio. And I said, Mike, I'm going to go full-time with Bungie, but I'm not moving. I'm still doing all my work in the studio that we built, because we built another studio downtown after the fire. So he's like, yeah, okay, I'll run the commercial side. You can bring in all the game stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm going to work for Bungie full-time. And because they had 2 big games in the hopper at the time, and I just couldn't do it freelance anymore.
Right.
So when Alex said, look, I know you just joined, you probably don't want to join Microsoft. I'm like, yeah, actually, I don't. It's like go from this little engine that could attitude of Bungie making whatever they can.
Yeah, like working out of the garage kind of thing.
Yeah. And like suddenly being a Microsoft thing and moving to where? Seattle? I mean,
yeah.
But I couldn't not work on Halo. I was so invested in believing that it was going to be something really amazing. So I said, okay, I'm going to go with you guys. I'm going to stay with Bungie and go to Seattle. And then I thought, we'll ship Halo and then I'll move back to Chicago. So maybe a year and a half in Seattle, then out. That was the plan.
Yeah.
As you can see how all my future planning has really worked out.
Yeah, I love it. You really have just been aimlessly wandering. That's what we're going to call this episode is the Wanderer.
It was a journey.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what they even call the character the Wanderer. So it's actually what you didn't know is that Journey, the game, is actually just inspired by your life.
Oh, and I thought so. I had that feeling.
It's a real privilege to finally say that out loud. I've been holding that close to my chest for the better part of a decade. So clearly, obviously, Halo, comes out, and the music is a central part of its success. I mean, it just is. And
well, that's what you say.
Thank
you very much.
I join a chorus of many millions of people in saying so. Actually, funny trivia about that. A number of years ago, I got invited to Australia to I worked for about a year. I was in LA for most of that time, but I worked with this trio of comedians who call themselves Tripod, based in Melbourne. And they are kind of like Flight of the Conchords, where they're comedian songwriters, and they're brilliant. And they're incredible lyricists. They're also incredible musicians, and they just do these comedy musical bit. I mean, they also just do straight comedy, but they sing very often. And they got approached by the Melbourne Symphony to create a show that later became known as This Gaming Life. And it is a full length. It's almost a musical, but without a stage and sets and things. It's just done, but with a full 80-piece orchestra. And so I got brought in initially. They were like, these guys need an orchestrator, and it's going to be game themed, and you guys could get along well. And I ended up, I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I was more or less co-writing the show with them.
Yeah.
Because they, we would all just kind of throw ideas together and Skype all the time, and we just got along really, really amazingly. And the thing is, because they're comedians, they sing and tell jokes about everything you could think of, but they're big nerdy gamers, which is where this came from, because they have a lot of songs about gaming.
Oh, okay.
And everyone should go look up. They have one that's called, they have a song that's called Gonna Make You Happy. That's like this kind of doo-wop romance ballad that's like, a guy sidling up next to his girlfriend, like, you look really nice tonight. And but I need like 10 minutes because I'm in between save points. And it's like, it's kind of the gist of the song. And it's really hilarious and they're like real singers and performers. And so anyway, they have this whole running joke throughout the show about how they were on tour and their road case basically only consisted of, toothbrush and an Xbox. And they said our stand-up act was basically just us on stage warming up for the Halo to follow. And so they have this thing about how they would, when they were playing, they would be in Blood Gulch and it would always become a musical.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And so they would be singing along, they'd be narrating through song their death match with one another, basically. And so it's the grand finale of the show. We do a 7-minute Halo musical
that
hilarious. Starts off with this like very solemn sort of chant-esque, very deliberate. It's not, we made sure to dance around the edges of copyright. So
I don't think you need to. You could have done whatever you wanted.
Well, I'll share it with you, but It's really funny because the song, it's called 3 Seconds of Halo, and the idea is it takes almost 10 minutes to describe the confluence of events, of like this guy spawning here right as this guy is pulling the trigger, and this guy's coming over the hill in the Warthog, and it literally, it's this massive epic piece with the orchestra going absolutely nuts.
Oh wow! I gotta see this.
It's the grand finale of our show.
Is this online someplace?
So when we premiered it, the ABC, the Australian version of the BBC, they followed us around for like the whole week, and there's like a 45-minute TV special about the premiere that has a lot of footage from the premiere, including I think the entirety of the Halo the musical, as we jokingly call it, 3 Seconds of Halo. In any case, so yes, I think that's a perfect demonstration of how big an impact that this made, because here we are.
Yeah.
That I did that show with them in 2014, I think. And so, we're 15, we're almost 15 years from when you were first creating that music.
And we were creating it in 99, believe it or not.
Yeah.
That song, the original monks and cellos, da 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 da, and that whole thing.
Yep.
Was 99. So.
And so, the homage was still being paid. Things often have a short shelf life, but this one has endured, and obviously then followed by a string of sequels. One I really particularly wanted to ask you about, because it's one of those that I never owned an Xbox growing up, and in that time, and I in college and all that, I was actually always a PC gamer, funny enough. So consoles were a thing much later in my life and much later into the life of consoles themselves. And so I always, to me, I always associated Halo with going over to a buddy's house and then we'd network together 4 of these things and and everyone would bring TVs.
Great.
I mean, it was a big thing and it was wonderful, but I associate it with that. And so as a result, I don't know the history of it as well as I might otherwise. And but as a composer, one that always spoke to me was ODST. And I just wanted to know, I'm just shining a light on my own ignorance into the context of it, because it's so different from the rest, and it's so sort of tasty. And I just wanted to know where. First off, did you always have the freedom to just kind of say, this is where I think this should go musically and creatively? Like, is that what the audio director title got you, or did you have to kind of still fly things up the chain? Because there's bold decisions throughout all these games.
Yes. So now we're talking my own ego again here, which is relatively large. I will admit that. But humble. That's what audio director meant to me.
Yeah.
And that's what I think audio directors should be. The audio director should cast the vision for the audio and realize the overall vision of the creative director.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go against the creative director, but I ain't taking any guff from the art director.
Right.
Because I'm an equal director, right? And like, I'm not going to tell you how to do art. You don't tell me how to do audio. I'm not that mean. I'm actually relatively easy to work with, but I just feel like the audio director should be a visionary.
It's a delegated creative.
So
task.
I always listen to what people were talking about, or what some of the designers might want, or whatever, and then I would say, well, here's what I think will really be good. And sometimes I would go do my own thing in certain ways, or I would do modifications based on some of what the designers in the studio would talk about. And frankly, what I really like is when I'm working with a creative director who, like Jason Jones was one of these guys on Halo 1, who would just come to me after I implemented some music into some level, and he would say, "Oh yeah, Marty, you know that music when we're going through the swamp, it's like I really thought it was going to make me feel tense and weird, but I just felt kind of goofy." And I'm like, "Wow, I did not want to hear that. Like, I did not intend for you to feel goofy." But that was very meaningful to me because he wasn't saying, "Marty, I think you're using a French horn here, and it should be a flugelhorn."
Yeah. Or the one that I always get is, I just was my friend's band was just playing, and it was really cool, and I really feel like you should just kind of take a look.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, I mean, sure, but
so the
can't promise anything.
The guys that I worked with primarily, the designers that I worked with at Bungie, almost never said anything like giving me actual musical directions. Bands, orchestras, films, you name it. They just didn't do that.
Right.
Now, all I ever wanted it was my job. And
them.
I wanted to hear what sort of feelings they wanted to feel.
Right.
Or what sort of feelings they felt when they heard some music I had done. And if they were feeling the wrong things, then I'm like, I got to go back and fix that. And if I heard something clear from them about feelings that they wanted, I felt like, oh, this was a great opportunity. And then, of course, I played the games from the very beginning, too.
Right.
And I felt like, oh, this is the most important part of this encounter. And this is a part of the encounter that you can spend a lot of time just sort of wandering. I think I'm going to do this other kinds of thing here. And this is a place where I'm going to go against what you would expect. Maybe no music, or maybe poignant music during a battle, or whatever. So,
I want to pause you right there briefly, because that's another thing. I remember when BioShock came out and was getting all the attention, and I was there among its loudest cheerleaders. It felt like I just thought it was absolutely spectacular. And one of the things that I loved, like for me, the most perfect film score probably ever written is Goldsmith's score to Patton. Oh. And there's like 40 minutes of music. Am I stealing another one?
You're stealing another one,
right.
But go ahead.
I'm not going to lie. I did hack your computer. I read through a lot of your emails. I thought, if I can just steal some of your ideas, I'm going to sound very authoritative. So yeah, Patton.
Yeah.
For me, one of the genius things of it is that it's just perfect, right? Yeah. It's like 41 minutes of score or something in a movie that's over 3 hours long.
Exactly.
And so the spotting of it and the use of silence it's a kind of a master class of its own, right?
Yep.
And that was one of the things I remember loving about BioShock, is it wasn't wall-to-wall music. And you're one of the only other folks, especially actually, it's still pervasively the case that I think games are pretty overscored.
Yes.
There's a heavy belief that, if there's no music, it just feels empty.
Yeah.
And that may be the case. It depends entirely, obviously, on the game and the scene and blah blah blah. But there was a sort of, maybe it's this bird's eye view of the whole experience, and not just looking only 1 inch in front of you and saying, well, there's no music here, so let's add music, but taking in the idea of, well, but that's part of a 5-hour chunk of gameplay, which is itself part of a 20-hour this or that. Is that coming from a specific place? Because silence is a very often overlooked and undervalued thing.
Yes. You're good at this, because you're leading into all of my strengths.
Well, I think we're
strengths.
I think we have similar mind in that, and especially on this one.
Yeah.
I love silence in games.
So back to when I was doing even commercials and films before games, there was a thing called the creative fee. Mm-hmm. So, because all of that music.
Now you're about to tap on another big one.
Yeah. So you get a creative fee, you're bought out.
Yeah.
Okay. But you could get a creative fee, and it had nothing to do with what your production was. There was a creative fee for your creativity.
Yep.
And then there was production costs.
Yeah, exactly.
So studio, musicians, copying, whatever else you needed, arrangers, conductors. But the creative fee was for, and I took this very seriously.
Yeah, it's the price for.
It's like,
extracting
this is my
from your
idea.
Brain. Yeah.
And so I used to say, yeah, if my creative fee is $10,000, and I tell you that this commercial should be sound design only and no music, I get $10,000 for a creative fee on that concept.
Yeah, we
I never did that, but I used to pretend like I could.
No, but there's a perfect case study of this in the world of film, which is Alan Silvestri's score to Castaway, where here you have a movie that has it has 14 minutes of score that is entirely within the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Okay.
It's all sound design up to that point. Tom Hanks stranded on an island.
And did Alan say he wanted that?
That was
or
his
the director?
idea. I mean, well, actually, the way he phrased it in an interview I remember reading 20 years ago was he said every time he tried to put music in the movie, it felt like it was becoming a movie, and it felt so real and in a way that was so right that it just was breaking the experience as it was clearly designed. And I remember thinking, if his fee was $1 million, he earned that $1 million by choosing 14 minutes of music. Absolutely. Because it makes the movie. When that first cue comes in, it's a solo oboe. Spoiler, he gets off the island. You've had enough time.
What? Wilson?
I know, exactly. If only he'd watched 5 more minutes. So he's off the island, and the first time you see a cue is when he looks back at the island and he sees it. Because he wakes up on the island after the plane crash. So he never really sees it from afar. He only sees it from the perspective of being on the island itself. So the first time he's able to look back and see it in its entirety is the first time Q comes in.
Yeah,
and
that's genius.
it's unbelievable. To me, it's one of the greatest of all time. And the idea that he should be paid less because it was, quote, less work, as if the process of getting to that conclusion is somehow less work, is crazy to me. So I absolutely love. I've always had a little bit of a struggle with the dollar per minute approach because it incentivizes overscoring the game.
Do you want to know something? I have never done dollar per minute.
Well, I think being in the audio director position must
even when I was freelance
help with that. Well, that's amazing.
I was against it because I came from a place where you got creative fees to have ideas. So I would not, anybody who ever asked me at the early days, what's your dollar per minute thing? I was just like, that's silly. I'm not ever going to do that. That's
for me. The problem is also on the other side of it, because let's say you look
from a production standpoint, I might say, well, I'm going to do 10 minutes of music here with this size orchestra. It's going to cost this much per minute,
of course,
to produce, but that's not the creative.
The other challenge, I think, of the strict dollar per minute approach. And look, I've had to do it. I do it on almost every game because it's just a fact of life. But we always have a conversation about it.
I will never make you do that if we ever work together.
Well, good to know for the future. Here's my card, sir. The other thing that I don't like about it, that is unfortunate, is it also incentivizes the developer to have as little music as possible, which sounds contradictory to all we're saying about our love of silence. But sometimes the game really does need more.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say no. And I've gone rogue before and just written more than I was being paid for, because in my mind, I signed the deal for this number, but then I just decided it was the creative fee.
That's
and I ignored
integrity.
It from that
That's
point
integrity
forward.
again. Yeah.
And I've gotten into some interesting situations because of that, because I didn't want them to suddenly come after me saying, well, look, you basically breached the contract by writing more because that forces us to pay you extra. And I'll say, no, I promise that's not why I did that, though. It's not like I'm trying to rob you. The game just needs more. And so now I try to always put language in there that says, at minimum, it'll say, plus or minus 10% or something, to try to give us that latitude to just be creative and let it be what it needs to be.
So certainly I've always known the power of silence. I know the power of rubato. I know the power of live performance. These are all things that I'm like, if I'm going to do game audio, I'm going to bring all of that stuff in. And I just remember, if the model was level music on Nintendo games, which is always is playing, it's music wall to wall, and primarily because there's almost nothing else. The sound effects were so dinky.
Sure, of course,
it was better just to have music.
Yeah, the audio experience was 99% music.
But that's when I finally heard Mist. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just water lapping and wind blowing. And then I go into this cool room and it's sort of ambient music and not really thematic. And then there's a theme over here. And I'm like, okay, that's a cinematic approach. And that's what I want to do. So from that point on, it's like, if I can be in charge of that. And luckily I was early enough on it that I didn't get a lot of people saying, okay, we want to hire you. And this is the kind of game we're making. And we have a bunch of exploratory stuff. So we need 20 minutes of walking around music, and we have battles. So we need 30 minutes of battle music. And, we need 10 minutes of scary music. And
well, they were probably looking to you to even figure that stuff out.
So, I mean, I just never had that as an assignment from anybody. And I know that is some of what ends up happening sometimes.
It is, yeah.
And I'm just like, look, obviously, I'm sure you're a fan of John Williams too. But
very much.
So the thing I would tell people about is Jaws.
Yeah.
And Jaws, of course, everyone knows Jaws. Everyone knows So, okay, this is the shark theme.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At the climax of the movie, when Roy Scheider is throwing chum off the back of the boat.
Yep.
It's just sound design.
Right.
And then in the middle of him doing it, suddenly, first time you actually see the shark full out of the water, jaws open. And then it goes back under, no music.
Yep.
And then as he, gets freaked out and goes into the cabin there, then you start hearing music come in. But like up to that point, John was smart. He's like, you're not going to see the shark,
Yep.
but I'm going to play shark music.
Exactly.
So you're from the perspective of the shark hearing this music and you get freaked out. That's why if a computer programmer was in making Jaws, there would be shark music for the shark.
Right.
And there would have been shark music when the shark comes out of the water.
Yeah.
Because it's what the program says.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, no, the reason it was genius because there was no shark music at that very specific moment.
Yep.
So you have to go against people's expectations. You have to have the freedom to do silence, to do poignant when it's battle, to do, something goofy when it's serious. I mean, you have to have the freedom to do something that's artistically right rather than the expected. And wall-to-wall music means that the music is constantly in your head. It becomes wallpaper. And then a solo oboe or a solo flute has no impact at all because you've just been hearing full orchestra for the last 20 minutes.
Yep.
And you have ear fatigue, you have music fatigue. It doesn't work. So
Well,
that's why silence is so, and of course, remember, it's never silent. Like as the audio director, I'm very involved in the sound design.
Yeah, right.
And the sound design, and of course, there are moments where sound design, is it music? Is it sound design? We don't know. It's not important. It's something that's ambient, but it's surreal or hyper-real. It's something beyond reality.
Yeah.
And then music can come in. Anyway, it's just so much fun to play with, but it's like those are my visions. That's the way I want to do it. And as audio director, I get to do that. So I had to start my own company to get back to doing that again.
Well, I think that's one of those where, since most composers are not the audio director, it's incumbent on them to align closely with the other folks that they're sharing that audio landscape with. What sound designers, obviously the audio director, mixers, whoever is going to be creating that, so that it becomes one audio experience. It's not just a bunch of people independently and kind of obliviously throwing things over the fence and somebody else just picking up the pieces and saying, well, I guess, this cue is pretty nice. This one, maybe we can re-edit it to fit. It's like, if that's all conceived of that way, the way you're describing, you can actually create something very meaningful.
And for me, audio director is the vision holder, and it's also the guy who gets the blame, but not necessarily the credit. I've had tons of amazing collaborative people that I've worked with, over the years that have contributed beautifully, wonderful, all sorts of stuff. But I'm the sort of final arbiter as to what actually goes in and how it goes in and how it is. So like if somebody says, oh, I really love the audio on that, it's like, oh, thanks a lot. On behalf of the team, was an amazing team that did this. But if they go, boy, I really hated that mix and that thing. I'm like, yeah, well, you could blame me for that.
Yep.
So
it's
willing
like a
to
film
take the
director
blame.
in that sense.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, if you love how it looks, thank the DP. If you hate how it looks, the director accepts your feedback. Well, so all right, then we one of our topics before we say our goodbyes, because there's so many.
What is it? Is this the third episode of this podcast?
Exactly.
I don't know where we are now.
Know how far in we are. Oh, it's still Wednesday, so that's encouraging. We're in a room that has no windows right now, and they keep bringing us water, so we have no sense of
bread.
What? Yes, bread's next. My chains are not that very uncomfortable though, so I feel very nice. You said you have had many great collaborators, and obviously we can't avoid the subject of one particular collaborator who Stephen Colbert once asked, how does it feel to be the best ever at something? I'll never forget, like many other people, when out of nowhere, from our perspective, a photo shows up online of you and Mr. McCartney.
Sir Paul, please.
Sir Paul. Working together. Obviously, we're now past the Halo days.
That's right.
And on the verge of destiny. How in the hell did that come to be?
So, Joe Staten, who is the writer who was at Bungie with me from almost the very beginning. He's the one who suggested Ancient, so I did Monks. He's also the one who said film noir, so I did Jazz for ODST.
Oh, so that
So once again, it came out of his head. He's the one, because I don't think I would have thought. I didn't know exactly what to do. It was going to be this new thing, but he says, "Yeah, we're going to take a different approach. We want to do like this film noir, smoky sax thing." Smoky sax, okay. Actually, I think he said Miles Davis, and I'm like, I don't want a muted trumpet, a smoky sax. So anyway, but anyway, he was showing, believe it or not, at the E3 where he was showing off ODST, right after Joe finished his demo on stage at the Microsoft event. They were showing the new rock band. Beatles rock band, and out on stage comes Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. And I remember watching that thinking, oh my gosh, this is as close to the Beatles as I'm ever going to get. This is so amazing. Apparently, at the same time, Paul was seeing this rabid crowd going nuts for them, and they were reintroducing the Beatles music to a whole new generation. And he started, the way he describes it, he started realizing that there was this whole new audience for musical things from in the game world. So, but I didn't put two and two together. The guy in LA who used to help us hire actors came to me. His name is Lev Chapelsky, and he came to me and said, "Hey, now that you guys aren't doing Halo anymore and you're going to do this new thing, Destiny," we were sitting around thinking, what would Marty, who would Marty want to work with now? And, the next level. And I'm like, well, that's great that you're thinking about this. And he says, so we decided you should talk to Paul McCartney.
I love how it's described as next level.
Yeah.
As if there's anywhere else to go.
It's like what?
You mean the last level?
Yeah. I mean, the Pope wants to have an audience.
Yeah, exactly.
With Paul McCartney. Okay. So I just laughed and I'm like, well, yeah, that'd be great. But like, what's your connection to Paul? He goes, we have no connection. And I'm like, okay. All right. Well,
We're just having a fun conversation.
We're just having a fun conversation. Like, sure, Lev, knock yourself out. I'll talk to you later. And so then a couple months goes by. I'm actually doing a keynote at Game Developers Conference for designers and audio people. It was one of the bigger keynotes. It was a combined thing. And just before I went on, Lev comes up to me and he grabs me. And Tommy, believe it or not, Tommy Talarico was introducing me. And Lev goes, Marty, I got you a meeting. And I'm like, what? I'm on stage talking to Lev. He goes, I got you a meeting with Paul McCartney. We'll talk after you speak. Like, oh,
I love how that's like, the same. It's the same, but the opposite of the like, your family just called. There's a terrible emergency, but go ahead, do your speech. We'll talk in an hour. It's like the flip of that. It's just, must have been either the best or the worst speech you ever gave.
Yeah, I don't even remember the speech, of course, because I was just.
We will hunt the archives.
We should.
How present you really looked.
I was just zoned out. But then, sure enough, a couple months later, I fly down to LA to have a meeting with Paul. Sir Paul had 20 minutes to give. He wanted to understand what it is to be a composer on a video game. What sort of thing were these guys doing? And so that's how I remember flying down thinking just having an appointment that says Paul McCartney is going to come in was good enough because I figured he's going to cancel. But at least I could say at some point I was almost going to meet Paul McCartney. Yeah, I was like, I would have been happy then. But sure enough, he came into the room and he's playing a little ocarina. He's being sort of goofy. He's super at ease. And like 2 hours later, we're still talking. And we're talking about kids and grandkids. I didn't have grandkids at the time, but, we were talking about his grandkids and my kids and stuff. And music. And I had already started working on this Music of the Spheres concept. So I showed him how music was implemented in Halo. And I showed him, a bunch of stuff that I had done and some stuff we were working on and how it could work. We talked about looping, and he talked about doing loops for a Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, the tape loops that they did. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So at the end of that meeting, I was going to stand up and shake his hand. And he came over and gave me this big hug. And I thought, okay, well, that's
not bad.
That was a good first date. Yeah. Maybe something will happen. Something will come out of that. And sure enough, he wanted to work with us. So it didn't, I remember going back to the guys at Bungie. And at the time I was on the board of directors at Bungie, and Bungie was getting bigger and bigger, and the expectations for Destiny.
I mean, Destiny
growing.
was
Like,
at the time and may still be among the highest budget games ever made. So, I mean, I can only
Yes.
imagine the level of pressure
Well,
and scrutiny and all that.
those are good things and bad things at the same time, obviously.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, at that moment, I knew that like pretty much anything I asked for, I was going to get, because
Up to and including a beetle.
and including a beetle. So the cool thing is Paul didn't ask for, he didn't want money. We offered him like a piece of stock. We offered him stock in a small company. Oh, I'm probably not even supposed to say that, but too bad. I don't care because of other things.
Yeah, he had a fair permanent rate, and
Yes,
he decided
yes.
to renegotiate.
So, but he wanted to work on it. He saw it as a new opportunity, and I, of course, was like, "This is unbelievable." I'd worked with some really great actors, and Steve Vai as a guitar player was amazing to work with, and some great musicians throughout the years. But I mean, the idea of Paul McCartney was just like, that's unattainable. That would never happen.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because what I said to the board was, well, there's two things that have to happen. I have to get to a point where I know Paul really trusts me. And then number two, I get to a point where I think what we're doing together is better than what would have happened alone.
Yeah.
And they looked at me, the biz guys, and just said, well, how long is that going to take? I'm like, wow, that's
71 days.
Yeah, that's not the point. Like, I'll know it when I get there,
Yeah.
and I know you have to trust me to get there. But like, if that doesn't happen, it's no good anyway. So yeah, we started trading stuff online. He would send me stuff, and I would make something out of it, and me and the guys would make stuff out of Paul's stuff.
And what was the nature of the stuff you were getting?
We were getting, synth stuff, sample stuff, little pieces of music. I got something, I still have it. Someday I'm going to share it. It's called Loop Symphony. And it was, he says, yeah, Marty, I pulled my old Brunel tape recorder out of the attic that I last used on Sgt. Pepper. I mean, imagine hearing that.
I can't actually imagine it.
And he said, and I did a whole bunch of loops. It was really fun. And I put it together in Pro Tools, and here's the session. So I have this whole, and we used a bunch of that stuff in stuff that's in Destiny. So,
and you sent him stuff as well.
No, actually at the time we were just sending him back. He would send us stuff, and then we would take it like, okay, let's make something, show him like the next step that we would take it to make it so it's more orchestrated, it could be used in the game, and show him that. And so sure enough, he was like, yeah, I like what you did. This is great. I really like it. I want you to know. I keep going. So now a few months goes by, I'm at Capitol Records. I'm in the studio where Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra recorded, and Paul's finishing his album there. Kisses on the Bottom. I don't know if you've heard that. It's just wonderful album.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so he says, come down. I'm in LA, let's meet. And so we had the afternoon in that studio. Nobody else was there. And so I was ready to show him some stuff I was doing with his themes and stuff. So I played him some stuff. I went to the piano, and I told him the title of the one movement was going to be called The Rose. And it would be based on Mars. And there was a reason why we had a black garden in the game. And it was just all these little connections. And he's like, oh, the Rose, I grew up in a neighborhood that still had remnants of the War of the Roses. And it was all about, are you a red rose or a white rose? And for some reason, he just thought that was cool. And then he told me the story of writing on a napkin Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and giving it to the guys, saying, here's my idea. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's cool. And he's like, he likes little off-the-wall kind of ideas, and the idea of doing a suite of music and having one of them called The Rose, he just sort of liked it. Anyway, he said, what about incorporating some of my stuff in that thing that you're doing? And I just sort of froze, because at that point we weren't really collaborating. I was just sort of taking his stuff and making something out of it,
right,
to some extent, and seeing if he liked it. I just hadn't conceived of this truly collaborative thing. And because I froze, he goes, hey, Marty, it's just the two of us here in the room. Like, I can say, fuck you, Marty, and you can say, fuck you, Paul, and it's okay.
Wow.
So...
Did you call the biz dev guys immediately and say, it's been 71 days?
Yes. But I froze because in my head, I'm like, I would never say that to you. My God, please don't ever say that to me.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, but I said, okay, Paul, like, and he'd already sort of told me about, like, he could collaborate with anybody. He could call up
You could
anybody.
call anyone.
Yeah. And so
It's
I said, look, you're well known as like one of the greatest collaborators of all time, and you're also well known as one of the greatest solo artists. So like your thing at all. I just don't know which way you want to work. And he goes, oh no, I'd love to take some of my melodies and combine it with your stuff, and it becomes our music. And I'm like, okay, well, there it is. I looked at my watch. It's sort of like that's how much time it took. So immediately at that point, it's like, oh, we're going to collaborate. I get to take anything he gives me, decide where it can go, see if he likes it, and just incorporate stuff. So that's how that happened. So at that moment, I'm like, this is amazing. So I can collaborate. And it's funny because I said, oh, like right away, I was at the piano and I'm like, here's this first piece called The Path, and it's got this little melody in it that I've already been doing, but you sent me a thing that has this other melody, and here's how it could go together. It's actually almost like counterpoint. I mean, it was like, I was immediately able to show it to him.
Legitimate
like, I love
collaboration.
This. Yeah,
and
totally.
It's not paying lip service.
No.
It reminds me of, I was recording at Abbey Road some few years
I
after
recorded
this.
at Abbey Road too. So
well, that was the story. that was the funny thing is because
okay.
I was talking with Mike and he goes, he was like, not to be that guy, but when I record at Abbey Road, I record with a Beatle, and sent me a photo of the two of you with him in fucking Studio One. And I was like, oh man, what an unbelievable. It reminds me, this is a total tangent, but a friend of mine is
well, you could edit this down to a 20-minute show.
The composer who did Black Panther, Ludwig Göransson. He's we're not super close, but we're friends. And his wife is a pretty good friend, and she's my concertmaster when I record in LA.
Wow,
Serena McKinney. We've known each other for many years, and I remember when they started dating, and he was working on Black Panther, and he went to Africa for a few months and all that, and then he had never recorded in London, and they do all the big Marvel movies there, and they were in Studio One at Abbey Road, and so of course he's over the moon. She goes with him, and then she comes back, and I'm asking her, how was the experience? How'd it go? And she was like, you'll never guess what happened. So his father, if I'm remembering, I might be getting a detail wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it was his father, Ludwig's father, has played his whole life in a Beatles cover band. Oh. So then he brings him to Abbey Road to record Black Panther, and Sir Paul just happened to show up that day.
He lives just down the street.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just like, I don't know what he was doing there.
Oh, of course.
I'm sure there's a story there, but so it's like,
he never goes across the street in the front, by the way. He always comes in the back.
Doesn't take the crosswalk.
Doesn't take the crosswalk.
Avoids it rather. Yeah. Well, that would be where he dies. Like that would be the ultimate horrible headline. But
okay.
But yeah, he got to take this photo in the hallway. Like this lifelong Beatles cover band guy gets to take a photo with it. And it's just so it's like to even be around him for people is an unforgettable thing. And so to have, how long was the time span then from that? Fuck you, Marty. It's just the two of us. Where in Destiny's sort of development was that from there to ship, say?
This was still probably early 2012, and Destiny finally shipped in fall of 2014. So
did you have an on again, off again thing for a couple of years?
I worked with Paul over a 2-year period, 2011 and 2012. It was all Paul, and then at the end of 2012, December of that year, we were done with it. We actually recorded all the final stuff at Abbey Road with the choir, with the orchestra, the boys' choir, Paul and his people. Well, we recorded some of Paul and his people in New York at Avatar Studios, which is the old rhythm. What do they call it? Oh, it's this famous old studio in New York. Anyway, I can't remember.
I don't know the New York studios as well.
Yeah. Anyway, so I had different meetings with Paul over the years. Capitol Records, someplace in Burbank, and
my neighborhood,
New York. Are you in Burbank?
Yeah.
Okay. It was some rehearsal place he was doing the Grammys. So he says, I'm doing the Grammys. Come on down and we'll spend some time in the rehearsals.
It's funny to me to think that I was at my computer, probably checking Facebook, and somewhere around the corner was the two of you. I don't know if that makes me happy or if it hurts me, but it's nice.
A full probably 6 months or so before we did the session. The final sessions were over a 5-day period in November of 2012. I had Paul wanted me to come meet with him and go over some stuff. That's where that picture came from. So that was actually the penthouse studio up at Abbey Road. So it's a smaller studio. It's more intimate. And
I can only just picture the faces. I just assume it was in Studio One.
Yeah. So, no, then later on in November, the faces of me and Mike and Paul were down in Studio One.
Oh, you mean the photo that you tweeted out?
The tweeted photo.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, and there was a little keyboard there, and I'm playing stuff for him again. And once again, it was just the two of us, except for the videographer who was there for like an hour, and then he left. And by the way, fans, that video still exists.
Good to know.
Right, yeah. Anyway,
that's like Steven Spielberg has home videos of every scoring session with John Williams, like all of them. I was in the room with the two of them once, and George Lucas was there
name
too.
Dropper, holy mackerel!
It's a USC thing.
Okay,
I can't
that's
take
all right.
any. I can't take any credit for it.
Yeah, you were at USC when they had all the nice facilities. I still had Quonset huts when I was there.
Well, they literally, as I left, Lucas and Spielberg made an almost $200 million donation.
I know. I remember that.
That's all after my time, too.
Was it really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was there. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it got a substantial upgrade
I've been
right
back.
as I left.
Yeah, I've been back. It is amazing.
It's unreal.
I would love to go there now and be a student again.
Oh,
anyway.
Well, in any case, I remember I was watching Spielberg was shooting everything John Williams, every little comment, everything. It was like watching the biggest John Williams fan on the planet. And this was 10 years ago. And it's like after all their history, he still just revered him. You could see it. It wasn't like this was for the benefit of someone else. There was a small group of people around. And so it's, to me that those little gems, I would love.
Wouldn't you kill just to have that
I
and
want
see
someday
it?
for him to put out an archive of all that. And likewise, I would love to see that tape of the two of you, because I can only, because once.
I'm not saying it's on my computer.
Well, good thing I already hacked it. So I just was clearly looking in the wrong folder.
Well, what I was going to say, about that session, the fun thing, sort of getting back to your thing, is that was my first time at Abbey Road, and I was just over the moon.
Because most of the Halo stuff had been done in Seattle, right?
We started in Chicago, and then the vast majority, there was a couple orchestra sessions early on in Chicago, and then we did the rest of it in Seattle. So over the next 10-year period. So,
right.
But there I'm at Abbey Road, which is the pinnacle of my life, and Paul is there, and we're working together. And then at some point, it was sort of like lunchtime, and he goes, "Hey, we should go down to the commissary and get lunch." And he goes, "Have you had a tour of the studio yet?" And I'm like, "No. Would you like a tour?" Yes.
My God.
So he's walking me around, and we go to this Studio 2,
of course,
up the stairs, and he knocks on the door and pokes his head in, and he goes, "Hey, do you mind if I show my friend here the studio?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, he called me his friend." And there's some people in there, and they're like, "No, sure, come on." I mean, who's going to say no? I was going to say, right?
They were like, "Actually, we're a little busy."
So we walk into that studio, and then we go over to the glass, and we look down on the white studio, right? And we're looking down with the stairs. You can see the stairs going down from the control room. And he goes, "Yeah, that's right down there is where all the magic happened." And I'm like, "Yeah, Paul, how many documentaries do you think I've not seen?" Like, of course this is where the magic happened. But I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's really cool."
Wow, there it is.
But I mean, we went to the commissary, and then Giles Martin came out, who's George Martin's son, and we talked to him, and they were talking about, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee or something they were doing the show for. And then Nick, oh my gosh, the drummer for Pink Floyd, Nick.
Oh, I can't remember.
Okay, anyway, he came out, and he goes like, "Oh,
they're tracking or something," or
they were doing. I don't know what he was doing there. Like it just was amazing.
It's just Abbey Road.
It's just Abbey Road. It's like, "Oh, Nick, come on over. This, here's Marty. We're working together on a thing." And it's like, "Oh gosh, I was just it was off the charts for me."
Unreal.
Yeah. So it's all been downhill since. Let's not get into that.
I mean, in fairness, there's no way anything could ever not be downhill after
That's what I think.
That's a culminating. Who wouldn't be honored to be downhill of that experience? I mean, that's just incredible. But I do want to end our wonderfully lengthy and indulgent chat, and thank you for giving so much time and so many great stories.
But there's no one listening anymore, you realize.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, it's true. It's true. We can say all manner of defamatory things because the listener tail off is at its zenith. So, but I want to, as someone who recently was spending a little time with Gollum, obviously a completely different beast and totally different sort of chapter of your career and new, like you said, new kind of start your own company and but the thing that especially intrigued me was the sort of prelude or prequel or however album idea, because that's the sort of thing I'm always interested in. How can I create sort of an incubator for a project? And you went out and did it in a way, at least that's what it looked like to me. And I just, give me a minute on that.
Yeah, going back to Destiny. So at some point around early 2011, before I started working with Paul, we had shipped Reach at the end of 2010, and then we were in a new studio, and there was a whole team that was already starting to work on what was going to become Destiny. But I came in, and it's sort of like I had to hit delete basically on all 10 years of Halo music. There was like right. I could, at least from a thematic standpoint or anything else, I could do anything I wanted to with the Halo music if we were making Halo games for Microsoft. Now we were making Destiny for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Activision was the publisher, but we owned Destiny. So it was just like, I remember telling the head of the studio at the time, I think he was actually the marketing lead at the time, I just said, look, there's no music we can just grab now and throw onto the, voice answering machine or something, and background. It's like Halo's gone. I said, there's a whole library of music that's just got to go away. I'm starting from scratch. And he's like, well, music really inspires the team, and we need more music. And I'm like, well, I need something to write for. Like, I don't know what Destiny is yet. We don't have any marketing trailers that we're doing at this moment. And he said, well, what if you just wrote music that's cool that could be used later? It's just sort of like the music that would be like the prequel to the thing. And I'm like, wait, what? Just write music?
It's music for its own sake.
Its own sake. And so I said, well, let me think about that. So I came back the next day. I had sort of an epiphany. I'm going to do this thing called Music of the Spheres. I had planned it out, which is very unusual for me. I just usually respond emotionally to something I'm seeing or stories or whatever, and then trying to write to that. I thought, well, gee, this is like the good old days where, why don't you just write a symphony or something? And
right.
like, okay, well, I haven't thought about
patron
that. Yeah.
Just sort of inviting
so,
it.
obviously I'm a giant Holst fan, and I thought, well, it's been 100 years since Holst took a shot at this. And, we had this image of a big sphere called, that was floating over the Earth, and we were going to stay within our own solar system. So I thought, yeah, Music of the Spheres. Like, I'll do a thing that's based like Holst, but based on the medieval concept of planets, which means the Earth is not a planet. Everything revolves around the Earth. So I'm doing this older concept, not Holst, which was more scientific. I was doing more mythical. Right.
Yeah, sure.
So, Jupiter is the king of the planets, and you don't go past Saturn because you only saw the planets that you could see with the naked eye. That's and humanity. Anyway, there's a whole reason why I did what I did. But I came up with this prequel-y idea that I knew could inspire fast music, slow music, happy music, sad music, heroic music, poignant music. You know what I mean?
Of course, yeah.
That's all. You're going to need that.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'd spent 10 years playing off of one 3-minute demo from 1999 for Steve Jobs. So I'm sure if I do a full 50-minute suite of music, I'm sure we can spin that out for years to come. So I thought, okay, let's do that, and let's make a musical prequel. So it'll be Music of the Spheres, the musical prequel to Destiny.
Yeah.
And then after a couple of years of doing that and finishing it and everything else, some things started to go south a little bit in my relationship with Bungie and Activision, and that's been covered plenty. We don't need to cover it here. But the album never came out.
Right.
It never came out as the prequel, and it ended up just being used in the trailers and used in the game and used in trailers for the game and used even in Destiny 2. And I wasn't there. I was an audio director. And I'm
Right.
sort of depressed about how that all happened.
Sure.
Well, anyway, I started this new company with Jamie Griesmer, who was a former Bungie designer who was there from the beginning. And he had left Bungie. I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see me. Back in beginning of 2011, and he went on to do infamous Second Son for Sucker Punch. I mean, he worked on he was part of the very first two people working on Destiny. He worked on Destiny pre-production for like 3 years. Then he left. Then he shipped Second Son, and Destiny still hadn't shipped.
Oh, God.
But anyway, as soon as I had quote unquote left Bungie, actually I was fired. So he came to me almost immediately and said, Marty, let's start a company. And I was sort of in shock, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, sure, let's start a company. So that's how we started Highwire. And then after we had done some prototypes for Sony, and then Sony said, run with this Golem thing. And then Jamie said, hey, you know what you should do? You should finally do that prequel album that never came out. Why don't you do the musical prequel to Golem? That's how that happened. So once again, these are not coming from me.
Right. Yeah.
Other people
I love how it's just this off the cuff suggestion. Like, hey, just go do a thing. And it's like consuming in a year of work or whatever.
It's true. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff you want to do.
But
right?
I remember, because I just remember it came out, and you did an interview or something that came across my Twitter or something like that. And I remember just checking it out and being like, I love that idea of it
was probably Kate Remington.
I think it absolutely was, actually. Just loving the notion of a little kind of creative laboratory to be able to explore ideas where there is no right or wrong yet. You're defining the vocabulary. It's like building a language where you can just kind of do anything, and plenty may not survive to the end, and plenty may. And there's certain ideas that wouldn't necessarily emerge under the constraints of, okay, well, now we know real specifically the kind of scenario of the game and this and that and this, and you're able to sort of explore in a more abstract way. And these kinds of creative exercises are things I wish our community would sort of try more often, because it's really easy to just say, like you were talking about before, what's the brief? I need 24 minutes of battle music. I need 26 stingers to get me in and out of, and it's just like, if your whole life is looking at a spreadsheet and sort of diagnosing from there, there's not a lot of room for exploration and creativity and failing at your ideas that then you can pick up off the ground and dust off and
well, I think it's the reverence for real creativity that I think needs to come to the forefront, because otherwise you're doing the same thing over and again, or you're copying something that you know is successful, or you're doing the elevator pitch. It's like, this is Star Wars meets Raiders of the Lost Ark, but only in the Old West or whatever. I mean, it's just like who I just like that doesn't. I mean, we took in a lot of ways, we took a bunch of chances with Golem, which we had the freedom to do. We took chances in every possible way because the stakes are just not that high. And that when, we started at Bungie, when we kind of realized that now we were at this level where there's 700 people in the studio and there's $500 million that's on the line from Activision. And I'm like, this is not, I mean, it might be fun for some people. It's just not fun. Yeah. It's for me. Right. And it wasn't fun for Jamie. And that's why we call our studio Highwire, because we want to go back to like having a small bunch of creative people that take chances, and maybe we fall to our death, but hopefully there's a
screaming with joy on the way down. Well, I think it's awesome. And there's some real beautiful expressiveness. That was the thing that I love. That's the thing I've always loved about your writing is, people think of Halo kind of got a bad rap, actually, as being sort of the ultimate bro dude frat house kind of game. It was always like guys doing keg stands and playing Halo in college, circa 2001 and 2 or whatever. And And that was always funny to me because I've always taken, obviously, an interest in the music of things. So even if I wasn't playing the game, I would always seek out the score because I just was curious what was going on. And especially knew this is at that point, this was an industry I was keen to find a way into somehow. And so the thing that I always thought was funny is this thing that's so associated with that kind of subculture of gamers has actually quite expressive, like you said, rubato, and there's a lot of things that define your writing that really run counter to the stereotype of the game.
Yeah.
And Gollum, I was right back in that. I remember, looking through the gameplay and having not listened to any music independent of it first. And it's like, and you look at the key art and all that, and it's easy to expect a certain kind of thing. And then there's long stretches with no music, and then it comes in, it's like these beautiful strings, and I was like, this is very Marty, and it's great. So I love it. And we're here recording this in Las Vegas because of nomination for the DICE Award for Best Original Score. We're actually competing for the same award.
I think I already know who's going to win, and I'm going to congratulate you before anybody else congratulates. You did. That was a beautiful, absolutely beautiful score.
Well, you're very kind, but I happily yield, especially because there's a certain.
Go ahead.
As I said, there's a certain. To me, your body of work obviously is so attached to this legacy with Bungie that one can't help but be sort of chomping at the bit to say, okay, well, now that part of your career is over, where the hell does somebody go after the biggest games ever, the most successful, pervasive, iconic themes, working with fucking Paul McCartney? And so if
Gollum, I didn't say that.
Yeah, it's well, you can say fuck. To me, it's where one goes, and with Gollum. Being that answer, the first of many answers to that. To me, there's an automatic interest and excitement, and of course that also kind of puts a little bit of pressure on, like, well, what the hell am I going to do? But I love that the attitude was, none of that matters. We're just going to embrace. We're going to pretend as if I'm putting words in your mouth, but we're kind of pretending as though we never even did any of that. We're making games as if it was back in 1999 or 1996.
That's the attraction.
Yeah. And it feels it. It just it didn't feel encumbered by the success of the I shouldn't say success. It didn't feel encumbered by the shadows cast of the prior work of the people that made it. So
appreciate that.
My congratulations.
Fingers
crossed for you.
Thank you. Well, same. Good luck to you too. And I was going to say before is that, like, this year especially, everybody says this sort of thing, but it really is an honor to be nominated, and it's an honor to be in the same group as I look at these other composers, including you, and I'm just like, wow, it's great for Gollum to have that sort of honor as a nomination. I'm just thrilled with that. So
well, it's deserved. I mean, one of the things that's great is that DICE, those awards are obviously that's peer that's peer chosen. Yeah. It's not like a big academy of people that just kind of say, well, I've heard of these games, so I'll vote for that. The way some others work, which everything has its strengths and its weaknesses, but in this case, DICE it's hashed out by a group of top folks in the business, and so to me, it's to your credit that Gollum VR games in general are kind of occupying a smaller pool adjacent to the sort of ocean of games, and so it's hard to get noticed. I've worked on VR titles that just vanished in an instant because it's just hard to get attention there. So all the more reason that it's exciting that Gollum was able to kind of poke its head out and get attention.
And we probably will be announcing relatively soon the next title that we're working on.
Oh,
and
great.
The only thing I'm going to say about it, because it's sworn to secrecy, is that it's not going to be VR. It's going to be not VR. So
new frontiers.
Yeah, new frontiers, but not sort of back to not VR.
Well.
Not that there's anything wrong with VR, but I think we pushed the ball forward as far as we could, and now we're going to take a break from VR, and maybe somebody else will push it some more. And I really believe that VR is sort of truly this last batch of VR. Everything is first gen. I think everybody thought, oh, this is when it's going to come of age, and I think we still got another 4 to 5 years before it really becomes if it's going to be the next big thing. I still think it's got more time and probably another generation of tech.
Well, Marty O'Donnell, I
Yes.
think it's safe to
We're
say.
going to reach across and shake hands.
My pleasure and honor. It's safe to say that you did not miss the boat on games. You just right by the skin of your teeth, made it in there.
Sort of like a surfer. I kind of
And-
hit the wave. and-
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
The last good waves of the day. This. I have no idea if this is going to get cut down, but this was awesome. I love being able to have this deep dive into all these different things. So few
I
people
enjoyed
have
it.
this diversity of background and crazy stories and wild adventures. So one last thing before we go.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners how they can find you. Twitter,
Well,
Instagram, whatever
yes,
it
it's
is.
really
you use.
easy. Go to highwiregames.com and you can be able to read everything that Highwire is doing. I'm obviously co-owner and audio director there. And my Twitter handle is Marty the Elder, I think. Yes, it's Marty the Elder.
I can
on
confirm.
Twitter, yeah. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I mean, it's really easy to know what my email is too. So I'm
Marty
not going
at
to say it now.
Marty.
Yeah, that's
I thought so. Beautiful. Well, I look forward to a flood of new tweets coming your way.
Yes. Okay, great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.